The year was 1876, and the high plains of New Mexico territory were baked red and fractured by the heat. Dust, fine as gray flour, lived in the air. It settled on every hat brim, coated every tongue, and drew gritty lines in the corners of every eye. The town of San Dismas clung to a raw fold in the earth, a place that existed for two reasons, the silver being pulled from the nearby hills and the promise of the railroad, which was still just a rumor of iron and smoke coming from the east. In San Dismas, the sun was a hammer. The wind was a dry rasp that stole moisture from the skin and splintered wagon boards. Water was not just scarce, it was currency. A man measured his wealth not in gold, but in the depth of his well. Ada Whitlock, at 22, understood this better than most. She was the town's teacher and, by necessity, its clerk, an orphan. She had inherited nothing from her parents but a piece of land outside town and a backbone made of solid rock. She was a woman of direct speech and quiet resolve. Her dark hair pulled back so tight it seemed to pull her eyes wider, making them watchful. And in the bottom of a locked tin box under her desk in the small, hot schoolhouse, she kept the town's future, the original hand-drawn map of the hidden underground springs and the legal deed to the water rights of the old Whitlock farm. Her purpose was simple, and she held to it like a religion. That water belonged to the community. It was the only thing that would keep San Dismas from becoming a ghost town owned by speculators. And she would not sell. Far from the dusty street, where the plains broke into canyons, Cole Navarro rode low in the saddle. At 28, he was a man made of whipcord and silence, part Comanche, part Mexican. He was a vaquero of uncommon skill, his movements on his horse so fluid they seemed one creature. He herded cattle when he had to, but mostly he rode for the horizon, following a philosophy boiled down to 3 words, liberty or death. He answered to no man, no clock, and no law but the turning of the seasons. From his saddle horn hung a lariat, a mecate not of hemp or rawhide, but of intricately braided horsehair, black and white. It had been his mother's. It was not a tool for roping cattle. It was a talisman, a reminder of a promise he never spoke aloud. He had been riding for 2 days, tracking a small herd of wild mustangs, and had not seen another human. He preferred it that way. The land spoke a clearer language than men did. Higher still, on the flat top of a red mesa, Tahan watched the town. They called him Hawk of the Night. He was a Comanche warrior who lived balanced between the world of his ancestors and the new sharp-edged world of the white man. He respected the laws of the sky and the earth, the way water flowed and the wind blew. He held a deep, cold contempt for any man who would steal water, who would hoard the sky's gift for himself. An intricate tattoo of a single hawk's feather marked the line of his jaw. He watched the heat shimmer rise from the tin roofs of San Dismas and saw the circling hawk high above him, a dark speck against the blinding blue. He saw it as destiny, a sign that the balance was about to be tested. The tension in San Dismas was thick enough to taste. It mingled with the dust and the smell of stale beer from the Coyote's Jaw saloon. The saloon was fuller than usual, populated by men who did not look like miners or cowhands. They were men with new boots and watchful eyes, hired guns who drank with a quiet purpose. They worked for Silas Bragg. Bragg was the shadow that fell over San Dismas even at noon. He was the man behind the new silver mine, the man who had promised the railroad, and the man who intended to own every drop of water in the county. His instrument in the town itself was Sheriff Pike, a man who wore a star on his chest but sold the law by the ounce for gold. Their goal was plain to anyone who was paying attention: get the water rights, by any means necessary, and force the settlers to sell their land for pennies on the dollar. The talk in the saloon, and in the dry goods store, and in the livery was of water. The creeks were dry, the wells were low, and there was a rumor, a whisper, of a ghost spring, a powerful, hidden artery of water that ran deep beneath the ground at the old, unused Whitlock farm. Silas Bragg did not believe in ghosts. but he very much believed in maps. He visited the schoolhouse in the late afternoon. The heat was at its worst, the air inside thick and still. The children were gone, and Ada was at her desk, recording town business in a large ledger. Bragg did not come alone. Sheriff Pike filled the doorway, blocking the light, his thumb hooked in his belt near his pistol. Bragg, by contrast, was all smiles and civilized polish. He smelled of expensive Havana tobacco and bay rum. He removed his hat, a fine gray Stetson, and placed it on her desk, next to a stack of primers. "Miss Whitlock," he said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "A pleasure, as always. Working hard for our little town, I see." Ada dipped her pen in the inkwell. "Mr. Bragg, Sheriff." She did not stop writing. "I come on a matter of the future, Miss Whitlock, a future of prosperity. The railroad is coming, you know. It will bring growth. It will bring civilization." He slid a folded document across the desk. "I am prepared to make you a very generous offer for your family's old parcel of land. More than generous. Enough to see you established in a fine house, perhaps back east, where a lady of your refinement truly belongs." Ada finished her line of script. She blotted the ink. She looked at the document but did not touch it. She raised her eyes to his. "My refinement is not your concern, Mr. Bragg, and my land is not for sale." Bragg's smile did not falter, but it lost all its warmth. "I am not speaking of a patch of dirt and scrub brush. I am speaking of the water rights, a technicality, really, something you, as a busy teacher, should not have to trouble yourself with." "I am also the town clerk," Ada said, her voice quiet but carrying in the small room. "I trouble myself with all technicalities. The Whitlock water is not for sale." Pike shifted in the doorway. The scrape of his boot on the wood floor was loud. Bragg leaned forward. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Miss Whitlock, progress is a powerful river. It has a way of washing away small obstacles, stubborn little rocks that get in its path." Ada stood up. She was not a tall woman, but she met his gaze levelly. "And some obstacles, Mr. Bragg, are bedrock. They do not wash away. They break the river." "The answer is no." For a moment, there was only the sound of a fly buzzing against the hot glass of the window. Then Silas Bragg laughed, a dry, humorless sound. He picked up his hat. "We will see, little teacher. We will see." He turned and left. Sheriff Pike gave her a long, flat look before following him. The smell of Bragg's cigar smoke lingered, a foul stain in the air. Ada stood for a long time, her hands pressed flat on the ledger. She felt the beat of her own heart, steady and hard, like a skin drum sounding a warning. 2 days later, the axle on her supply wagon snapped. She had driven it out onto the prairie herself, 10 miles from town, to deliver some books and supplies to the Miller family, who were trying to dry farm on a hopeless piece of land. On the way back, the left front wheel hit a buried rock in a washout, and the heavy thud and crack of the axle was sickeningly final. She climbed down. The wagon sagged. Useless. She looked around. Nothing. The red earth stretched away in every direction, shimmering under the white sun. The only movement was a hawk, high up, turning slow circles. She was alone. Ada was not a woman given to panic. She assessed the damage. The axle was thick hardwood, and it had split clean through. She had no tools to fix it, no way to brace it. She had a canteen with perhaps a quart of water left. It was a long walk back. She sat in the thin shade of the broken wagon and considered her options. She would wait an hour, in the worst of the heat, and then she would start walking. She had been sitting for perhaps 20 minutes when she heard the sound. It was not the plodding of a draft horse, but the quick, light steps of a saddle horse. A rider appeared over a low rise, silhouetted against the sky. He did not ride like a townsman. He rode like he was part of the horse. It was Cole Navarro. He reined in his buckskin horse a few yards away and looked at her. then at the wagon. He wore no expression at all. "Axel," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Ada replied. He swung down from the saddle in a single, fluid motion. He walked to the wagon and crouched, examining the brake. He gave it a hard shove. "It's a bad brake." "I am aware," Ada said, her voice drier than she intended. He looked at her. His eyes were dark, and she could not read them. He walked back to his horse, unstrapped a heavy canvas roll from behind his saddle, and brought it back. He unrolled it, revealing a collection of well-oiled tools, a small hand saw, a brace, hammers, and thick strips of rawhide. He said nothing else. He simply began to work. He found a sturdy piece of mesquite nearby, stripped it of its branches, and began sawing 2 lengths to use as a splint. His hands were dark from the sun, scarred, and completely steady. He worked with an economy of motion that was almost beautiful to watch. Ada stood and unhooked her canteen from the wagon. She walked over to him. "Water." He stopped sawing and looked up. He nodded once. He took the canteen, wiped his mouth on his sleeve, and took a short, quick drink. He screwed the cap back on and handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers. His hand was calloused and warm. "Thank you," he said. She returned to her patch of shade and watched him. He wrapped the splints, pounded them tight, and then began wrapping the entire brake with the wet rawhide, pulling it so taut his muscles stood out in his forearms. He worked for nearly an hour, the only sounds the rasp of the saw, the tap of the hammer, and the grunt of his own breath. She noticed the lariat on his saddle. It was not a tool. It was finely braided. The dark and light hair of a horse's mane woven into a pattern. It seemed out of place on such a practical, hard-used saddle. Finally, he stood up and wiped the sweat from his face with a red bandana. "It will hold," he said. "Get you back to town. Go slow. Do not hit any rocks." "I will try not to," Ada said, standing. "I am in your debt, Mr. Navarro, Cole Navarro." "Ada Whitlock." She offered her hand. He looked at it for a second, then took it. His grip was firm and brief. "Ma'am." Were you just riding by?" "I saw the dust stop," he said, gesturing vaguely. "A wagon on its own stops. It's trouble." He turned and began rolling his tools. "I cannot pay you," she said quickly. "But if you come by the schoolhouse, He stopped and looked back at her. A flicker of something, maybe humor, touched his eyes. "Wasn't looking for pay, ma'am, just fixing a wagon." He tied the roll, secured it to his saddle, and mounted his horse. He looked down at her. The sun was at his back, and she could not see his face clearly, just the brim of his hat. "You should be careful," he said, his voice soft. "This is hard country to be stranded in." "I am aware of that, Mr. Navarro, but I am grateful." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that was both polite and dismissive. Then he turned his horse and rode away, not back toward town, but west, toward the empty spaces. Ada watched him until he was just a small shape, blending into the red and gray dust. She climbed back onto the wagon seat, picked up the reins, and clicked to her horse. The wagon moved, the repaired wheel turning slowly, but holding. That night, from his camp on the mesa, Tahan watched the lights of San Dismas. They looked like fallen stars, small and trembling. He heard the dry click of thunder in the clouds far to the south, a storm with no rain. He built no fire. He sat with his back against a cold rock and listened to the earth. He felt the vibration long before he heard the sound, a faint, rhythmic pounding. It was not the drum of his ancestors. It was the sound of heavy machinery, the sound of men digging, far off. He closed his eyes and spoke into the wind, his voice low, for only the spirits and the hawk to hear. "When the railroad comes," he said, "the law will change. Whoever holds the water holds the life." The day of the inquiry dawned suffocating and still. The sky was a pale, dusty yellow, and the air in San Dismas was so thick it felt like breathing wool. Sheriff Pike had called a town meeting, not in the church, but in the schoolhouse. It was a calculated move, meant to corner Ada Whitlock on her own territory and turn it against her. By 10 in the morning, the room was full. Townsfolk, smelling of sweat and anxiety, crammed onto the children's benches, their knees nearly to their chins. Old Man Whitaker, the well-digger, was there, his face a map of sun-baked wrinkles. Rosalia, who ran the saloon with a firm hand and a soft heart, stood at the back, her arms crossed. Silas Bragg was not on a bench. He stood near the front, next to Ada's desk, as if he already owned it. He wore a fine wool suit despite the heat and smelled faintly of bay rum and his signature Havana tobacco. Sheriff Pike, his star seeming to glitter with a dull, heavy light, pounded the desk with a gavel. "This meeting is called to order," Pike announced, his voice too loud for the small room. "We are here to address the public concern regarding the ongoing water scarcity." He nodded to Bragg. Silas Bragg stepped forward, his expression one of solemn, neighborly concern. "My friends," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "We are in a crisis. The creeks are dust. Your cattle are suffering. Your children are thirsty." He let the words hang. "And yet, we have a potential resource, untapped, held in private hands, that could save this town." All eyes turned to Ada. She stood by the blackboard, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "My family's water rights are filed and legal." "Mr. Bragg," she said, her voice clear and steady. "They are not untapped. They are the town's future reserve. They are not for sale." "For sale?" Bragg raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. "My dear Miss Whitlock, I'm not talking about a sale. I'm talking about the public good, about survival." He produced a paper. Territorial Statute 44, Section 3, clearly states that in times of dire public need, all resources, including subterranean water, are subject to emergency municipal review. A murmur went through the crowd. This was new. This was law. "Therefore," Bragg continued, "as the head of the San Dismas Emergency Committee, I am formally requesting you turn over your documents, the map, the deed, all of it, for official appraisal by the territorial surveyor." Sheriff Pike stepped forward. "Hand them over, Miss Whitlock. It's the law." Ada felt the trap close. This was not a request. It was a public stripping. "And if I refuse?" Pike's hand settled on the butt of his pistol. "Do not make me compel you. Ma'am, I will have those papers, one way or the other." The air crackled. The silence was absolute. Ada looked at the faces of her neighbors. She saw fear. She saw desperation. And in some, she saw suspicion, all of it aimed at her. She had no choice. "Very well," she said. She turned her back to them and walked to the tall, painted cabinet at the back of the room where the town records were kept. She inserted her key into the lock of the heavy tin box on the bottom shelf. The moment her fingers touched the documents inside, she knew. Her heart stopped. The original map, the one her father had drawn on thin, oiled parchment, was gone. The paper he had used was old, soft as cloth at the creases. This was different. This was stiff, new paper, artificially aged with tea stains. The ink was flat, lifeless. It was a copy, a skillful, useless forgery. She went cold, then hot. Her eyes darted to the cabinet door. On the metal latch, almost hidden, was a dark red smear. A smudge of damp clay. It was not the brown dust of the prairie. It was the unmistakable, iron-rich mud from Silas Bragg's silver mine. And beneath it, lingering in the closed space, was the faint, ghostly scent of Havana tobacco. She heard Pike's boots scrape behind her. "Finding what you need, teacher." She thought faster than she ever had in her life. If she told them the real map was stolen, her claim would vanish. She would have nothing. Bragg would win by default, but this fake map, what was its purpose? It was a replacement. He wanted her to present this. Why? She took a slow breath, her mind racing. Bragg had an alibi. He had made a great show of taking the stagecoach to Santa Fe for 3 days, returning only this morning, full of talk about his meetings with territorial delegates. He was clean, but his men were not. "Here," she said, turning around. She held the forged documents in her hand. Her face was pale, but her expression was hard as stone. "Here are the papers." Bragg smiled, a thin, victorious pulling of the lips. He reached out to take them. "Hold on!" The voice came from the open doorway. It was quiet, but it cut through the thick air like a chilled knife. Cole Navarro stood there, leaning against the door jamb. He was covered in trail dust, his hat in his hands. He did not look at Bragg. He looked at Ada. Pike scowled. "This is a closed meeting. Cowboy, get on." "Just curious," Cole said, his eyes drifting to the red smear on the cabinet latch. Ada saw him notice it. "Seems like a lot of official business happens in the dark." Bragg turned fully. "What is the meaning of this? Sheriff, remove this man." "I was sleeping in the livery loft last night," Cole said, his voice conversational, as if speaking to Ada alone. "Saw 2 men ride up to the schoolhouse. It was late, past 2 in the morning. They didn't knock." Pike took a step toward him. "You're interfering with official town business. Vaquero, that's a jailable offense." "They were riding horses shod with mine cleats," Cole continued, ignoring the sheriff. "Heard 'em clicking on the stones. They were in here for maybe 5 minutes. When they rode out, one of 'em lit a cigar. Not the expensive kind. Like Mr. Bragg's. Smelled like cheap, wet tobacco. But they rode straight back toward the Bragg mine." A gasp went through the room. Silas Bragg's face, for the first time, went rigid. The mask of civility was gone, replaced by a flash of cold fury. "That is a lie." Bragg snapped. "A drifter's fantasy." "Maybe," Cole said. He straightened up from the door. "But it's what I saw." "Sheriff," Bragg commanded, "arrest this man for obstruction of justice." Pike drew his pistol. "You heard him. Cowboy, you're under arrest." Cole Navarro did not move. He just looked at Pike, his eyes flat and empty. He seemed to be weighing the pistol, the man holding it, and the whole room, and finding them all lacking. Then, very slowly, he looked at Ada. He held her gaze for a single, long second. It was not a look of comfort. It was a look of shared, sudden understanding. Then he turned, not in a hurry, and stepped back out into the blinding sunlight. He was gone. Pike, looking foolish with his pistol drawn, holstered it with a growl. "Vagrant!" he spat. Bragg composed himself. He snatched the forged map from Ada's hand. "This meeting is adjourned. The documents will be appraised." He and Pike pushed through the stunned crowd and left. The townspeople filed out, silent, avoiding Ada's eyes. They were caught between the law and the truth, and the law had the gun. High on the mesa, Tahan watched the group disperse. He had seen it all. He had seen the 2 men from the mine. He had seen their tracks, the special shoes on their horses. He had seen Cole Navarro watching from the livery, and he had seen the hawk, his namesake, circling over the schoolhouse as the sun rose. The balance was broken. The snake was in the well. That evening, Ada returned to the schoolhouse. She felt hollowed out, defeated. The place felt violated. She walked up the 2 plank steps to the door and stopped. On the dusty boards, placed dead center, was a small, smooth piece of river wood. Tied to it with a strip of sinew was a single, perfect feather. It was reddish-brown, barred with black. A hawk's feather. It was not from any bird in this valley. It was a signal. She picked it up. The wood was still warm, as if from a human hand. She looked out at the vast, darkening landscape, toward the high, flat silhouette of the mesa. A chill ran up her spine, but it was not fear. It was a jolt of something else, a thread, thrown from a place she did not know. She clutched the charm in her hand and went inside. The next morning, the 30-day freeze was posted. The edict, nailed to the church door, was clear no man, woman, or child was to draw water from the Whitlock spring, under penalty of law. The community well was already desperately low. By afternoon, the panic had set in. The heat was relentless. By sundown, cattle were lowing with the painful, thick sound of thirst, and right on time. Silas Bragg's first water wagon rolled down the main street, pulled by 4 heavy mules. The barrel was full, the water sloshing, dark and cool. Bragg's man set the price. It was 20 times what water had ever cost in San Dismas. People paid. They lined up, their faces grim, handing over coins for a single bucket. They looked at Ada as they passed her, their eyes accusing. She was the stubborn woman who was letting them die of thirst while the crooked man saved them. Ada stood in the street, the dust thick on her boots, the hawk's feather hot in her fist. The paper law was a lie. The town was a prison. She looked at the people paying Bragg's price. She looked at the armed man on the wagon. She looked at Pike, watching from his office, smiling. She had to choose. Trust the law that had betrayed her, or trust the 2 men who lived outside it, the cowboy with the watchful eyes, and the warrior who left signals on her doorstep. She turned and walked, not toward her home, but toward the livery stable. Cole was there, sitting on an overturned bucket, meticulously braiding a new leather popper onto the end of a long whip. His horsehair lariat was coiled neatly on his saddle nearby. "Mr. Navarro," she said. He did not look up, but his hands stilled. "Ma'am, rough day for a town meeting." "They're selling water," she said, her voice tight. "His water, at his price." "I saw." "That map I gave them," she said, stepping closer. "It was a fake. The real one was stolen by Bragg's men." Now he looked up. His eyes were dark and hard to read. "You're sure?" "I am. They left a trail." She opened her hand and showed him the hawk's feather. "And I found this, on my doorstep." Cole stared at the feather. He nodded slowly. "Tahan." "I need to find him," Ada said, her voice low and urgent. "You said you saw those men. You know what's happening. The law is just a tool for Bragg to steal everything. I need another kind of law, an older one. I need to know what the earth knows. They say Tahan can listen to the ground, that he knows the real water." Cole stood up. He was taller than she'd realized. He looked down at her, his face unreadable. "The Mesa is dangerous country, ma'am, especially for you. You're being watched." "I am not, ma'am," she said, her frustration breaking through. "My name is Ada, and I am not a delicate thing to be protected. I am a woman watching her town die because a thief is choking it. I will not let it happen. I am going to that mesa. I am asking you to guide me. Will you?" He looked at her for a long time. He saw the desperation, but beneath it, he saw the same iron bedrock she had shown Bragg. It was a quality he understood. This was not his fight. He owed this town nothing. He could be on his horse and 100 miles away by morning. Free. But he thought of the lariat on his saddle. He thought of his mother's words. "It is not to take. It is to save." He gave a short, sharp nod. "At sundown, bring water and travel light. We'll be followed." As Ada hurried away, her boots kicking up clouds of dust, a man lounging in the shade of the saloon across the street touched the brim of his hat. He watched her go, then watched Cole turn back to his work. The man took a slow drag from a cheap cigar, the smoke clouding his face, and then he slipped back into the darkness of the coyote's jaw to make his report. The sky overhead was darkening, the yellow dust thickening to a bruised, angry purple. They left at sundown. The last light of the sun bled across the western sky, turning the high clouds the color of a fresh wound. Cole Navarro moved first, his horse stepping light, Not through the center of town, but back, through the alleys smelling of wood smoke and refuse. Ada Whitlock, dressed in her plainest riding skirt, followed on a horse she had borrowed from the livery. She rode with a straight back, her face pale but set. They did not speak. Cole led her west, away from the mesa, a feint for the eyes he knew were watching. Ada saw them, two men silhouetted for a moment against the skyline, sitting their horses on a low rise. They were being followed. Cole did not seem concerned. He held a steady pace until the red light was gone and a deep, bruised purple filled the sky. Only then, in the true dark, did he turn south, plunging into the winding dry bed of an arroyo. The wash was a maze of sand and rock. The air cooled rapidly. Above them, the stars were so thick they looked like spilled salt. They rode for hours. The only sound, the clack of hooves on stone and the sigh of the night wind. Cole was navigating by memory, by the shape of the land against the stars. Ada felt a growing sense of isolation, a feeling of being untethered from the world she knew. Just past midnight, the moon rose, a lopsided, brilliant white disk that washed the landscape in silver and black. It made the high, flat mountain ahead of them look like a fortress, the mesa. Cole reined in his horse at the base of a narrow, broken trail that seemed to rise straight up the cliff face. He dismounted. He said, "We walk from here. It is too steep for the horses." He tied the reins to a scrub bush, and Ada did the same. The climb was brutal. It was less a trail and more a scar in the rock. Ada used her hands, her fingers scraping on the rough sandstone. Cole moved ahead of her, silent as a shadow, testing each foothold before he put his weight on it. He seemed to know this path intimately. When they reached the top, Ada was breathing hard, her lungs burning. The mesa was not flat. It was a vast, alien garden of strange rock formations and twisted, skeletal trees. The wind up here had a voice, a low moan that never stopped. A figure stepped out from behind a tall spire of rock. Ada started, her hand flying to her throat. It was Tahan. He had made no sound. He was just there. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple cloth shirt. The hawk feather tattoo on his jaw was dark in the moonlight. He nodded once to Cole. His eyes, dark and unblinking, turned to Ada. He carried a long, smooth stick, almost a staff. He held it out to her. He said, "You came to listen." Tahan led them away from the edge, toward the center of the wide, flat expanse. He stopped at a place where the rock was bare, swept clean by the wind. He knelt and placed his ear to the stone. He was still for a full minute. Cole stood guard, his gaze sweeping the rim of the mesa, watching their back trail. Tahan rose. He handed the stick to Ada. "Put the end here," he said, gesturing to the rock. "Hold the other end to your ear. Close your eyes." Ada hesitated. This felt like a ritual, not a solution. She looked at Cole. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Do it." She did as she was told. She knelt, placing the wooden staff on the rock, and pressed her ear to the polished top. At first, she heard only the wind. Then, she pushed the stick harder against the stone, and the sound of her own blood faded, replaced by something else. It was deep. A low, slow vibration that was not just a sound, but a feeling. It was the rhythm of the earth itself, vast and slow. Tahan spoke, his voice low. "Now, move the stick, 3 steps." She did, scraping the stick across the stone. She knelt again, pressed her ear to it. The sound was different, duller, empty. "Move again," he said. She moved, and again. With each placement, the sound changed. Here, it was hollow. There, it was silent. Then, Tahan guided her hand to another spot. "Listen here," he said. She pressed her ear to the wood. The sound was back, but stronger. It was not just a vibration. It was a sound like a great drum, beaten slowly, far, far away, deep beneath her feet. It was the sound of a massive, hollow space filled with power. She pulled back, her eyes wide. "Water," she whispered. Tahan nodded. "The ground speaks. You only have to learn the language." He took the stick. "The fathers of my father listened here. They knew the Nagahe." "What is that?" Ada asked. "The great water snake," Tahan said, his gaze distant, looking out over the moonlit expanse. "He sleeps under the desert. Where he turns, the springs are born. Where he rests, the deep water waits. He gives life." He pointed the stick toward Sandismus, a cluster of tiny, dark shapes far below. "Your people, they dig, they blast the rock, they anger the earth." He looked at her, his eyes intense. "The old ones say, if you insult the water, if you try to own it, the desert will swallow you." He turned and began to walk. Cole and Ada followed. He led them to a jumble of boulders, a place that looked like a giant had scattered his marbles. Tahan stopped, knelt, and reached deep into a crevice between two massive stones. He pulled something out. It was a small, folded piece of oiled parchment, wrapped in wax paper. "My map," Ada breathed. Tahan unfolded it. It was not the whole map. It was a torn fragment, but it showed the area around her family farm, and the lines indicating the springs were drawn in her own father's meticulous hand. It was real. Tahan pointed to the wax paper it had been wrapped in. A small red wax seal had been used to close it. The seal was broken, but the impression was clear, a crossed pickaxe and shovel, with the words Sandismus Printing embossed in a circle. The print shop was owned by Silas Bragg. "He stole it," Ada said, her voice shaking with a cold rage. "He stole it, had his printer make a forgery, and then he tore up the original." "No," Tahan said. He pointed to the crevice. "This was not thrown away. It was hidden." Cole stepped forward, his eyes scanning the rocks. "He was here. One of his men. They came up here." He looked at Tahan. "They were looking for something. Looking for this place." A shot cracked through the night. The bullet sang past Cole's head, so close he felt the heat of it, and shattered on the rock behind him. "Ambush," Cole yelled. He grabbed Ada's arm and pulled her down behind the boulder. Gunfire erupted from the rim of the mesa, at least 4, maybe 5 rifles. They were pinned down. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness, the bullets whining and screaming off the stones. Tahan had already vanished. He slipped between the rocks like smoke. A moment later, a single shot came from a new position. Far to their left, one of the rifles went silent, followed by a curse. "We have to move," Cole said, his voice tight. "They have us sighted. We run for the trail. On my mark." He pushed Ada ahead of him. "Go." They ran, crouching low, darting from one stone to the next. The air was full of the sound of lead striking rock. Ada felt a sharp sting on her arm and cried out, but she did not stop. They were almost at the edge, the place where the trail began. A man, a heavy shape against the moon, rose up from behind a rock directly in their path. He raised his rifle. Cole shoved Ada hard. To the side, she stumbled, her boots slipping on the loose gravel at the very edge of the cliff. She cried out as her feet went out from under her. She was falling. She screamed, her hands grabbing at empty air. She stopped. The jolt was so violent it nearly tore her arms from their sockets. She was hanging in the blackness, the sheer drop of the cliff face yawning 1,000 feet below her. Cole, he was lying flat on the rock, his arm stretched out, his hand locked onto her wrist, but he was sliding, the gravel shifting under his chest. The man with the rifle was turning toward them. "Cole," his face a mask of strain, his teeth gritted, shouted, "I cannot hold you." He let go of her wrist. Ada screamed again, a sound of pure terror. But she did not fall. Something else had caught her. A loop of something strong and rough was suddenly around her other wrist, biting into the flesh. It was the braided horsehair lariat. Cole had let go with one hand only to grab his lariat, shaking out a single loop and snagging her arm in a motion so fast she had not even seen it. He had braced his boots against a small rock. The lariat wrapped around his anchored arm, the muscles in his neck and back standing out like ropes. He held her. The lariat held her. The man with the rifle leveled his gun at Cole's exposed back. A sound, like a bird's cry, came from the darkness. Tahan! He flew through the air, launching himself from a high rock. He struck the gunman like a hawk hitting a rabbit, a knife flashing in his hand. The man collapsed. Cole grunted, pulling, hand over hand, the horsehair braid cutting into his palm. He dragged Ada back over the edge. She scrambled onto the solid rock, shaking, sobbing for breath. Another bullet zipped past. "They are still coming!" Cole yelled. He pulled her to her feet. They ran. Tahan was already at the trail, gesturing for them to hurry. They scrambled down the broken path, half sliding, half falling, the sound of shouts and more gunfire above them. They did not stop until they reached the horses. Cole cut her horse loose, slapping its rump hard. "Go!" he yelled. He pulled Ada onto his own horse, swinging up behind her, wheeling the animal around. Tahan was already on his own pony, which had been hidden in a different spot. They rode, not through the arroyo, but straight out onto the open plain, flying across the silvered ground. They rode for miles, pushing the horses hard, until the mesa was just a dark shape behind them. Cole finally slowed his horse to a walk, the animal's sides heaving. Ada was pressed back against his chest, her whole body trembling. She realized her arm was stinging. She looked down. Her sleeve was dark and wet. "You are hit," Cole said. "No," she said, her voice thin. "It is not mine." She turned. A dark stain was spreading across his side. He looked down, as if surprised. "It is just a graze." Tahan rode up beside them. He, too, was bleeding, a dark line running from his shoulder down his arm. They found cover in a small, sandy hollow. Ada tore strips from her petticoat. She looked at Cole's side. The bullet had ripped through the fabric of his shirt and his skin, a long, shallow groove. Tahan's was similar, a clean graze on his upper arm. Ada opened her small saddlebag. She pulled out a packet of dry, brown powder. Old Man Whitaker had given it to her for cuts, mesquite powder. He had called it. She poured the powder directly into Tahan's wound first. He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, but he did not move. His dark eyes watched her face in the moonlight. She took another strip of cloth and bound his arm, her hands surprisingly steady. There was a quiet understanding in his gaze, a respect. She turned to Cole. He had pulled his torn shirt away from the wound. She knelt beside him. "Hold still," she said. She poured the powder onto his side. He flinched, a sharp, hard movement, but he made no sound. "I am sorry," she whispered. "No need," he grunted. She tied the bandage around his waist, her fingers brushing his skin. He was warm, his muscles tight as steel. For a moment, they were very close, the world reduced to the pale moonlight, the smell of dust and blood, and the quiet sound of their breathing. Trust, born in fire and falling, settled between them. Tahan was examining a piece of wood, part of a crate that one of the attackers must have dropped. He held it up. Carved into the wood were 3 words and a number. Milepost 341. Ada looked at it. "What does it mean?" "It is the railroad," Cole said, his voice rough. "It is a survey marker. They are bringing something on the train, something heavy." "Pumps," Tahan said, his voice flat. He pointed back toward the mesa. "They were not looking for your father's map. They were looking for the place your father marked, the place to drill, the place to put the steam pumps." "The railroad is bringing the pumps," Ada said, the pieces clicking into place. "They will bypass the spring. They will drain the deep water. The water Tahan heard, they will take it all." The 3 of them looked at each other. The teacher, the cowboy, the warrior. 3 people pushed to the edge. Ada stood up. She looked at the torn parchment, the map fragment, still clutched in her hand. She looked at Tahan's staff. She looked at the horsehair lariat coiled on Cole's saddle. She held out her hand. Tahan placed his staff across her palm. Cole, understanding, unhooked his lariat and laid it over the staff. Tahan placed his hawk feather charm on top of the braid. "We keep the water," Ada said, her voice no longer shaking. "We keep it for the thirsty." Cole put his hand on top of hers. "For the thirsty." Tahan covered their hands with his. "The land will judge," he said. When they rode back into San Dismas, just before dawn, the town was already stirring. A new notice was being nailed to the wall of the sheriff's office. Sheriff Pike himself was hammering it in. He saw Cole and Ada ride in, and a slow, ugly smile spread across his face. Cole led Ada down by the livery, then rode his horse into the stable. When he came out, Pike was waiting for him. "Cole Navarro," Pike announced, his voice booming for the benefit of the gathering crowd. "You are under arrest." "On what charge?" Cole asked. "Disturbing the peace, causing a public disturbance, and vagrancy. There is a $500 reward for your capture." The people of the town had gathered. Some, like Old Man Whitaker, looked angry at the injustice. But others, the ones with thirsty cattle and sick children, looked at Cole with a new, cold calculation. $500? That was a lot of water. The town was split. Half wanted to believe Ada, to fight. The other half just wanted peace. They wanted water, and they did not care who they had to sell out to get it. Pike drew his gun. "Put your hands up, Cowboy. The fight was no longer in the shadows. It was in the street, for everyone to see." Rosalia's voice cut through the tension like a fresh blade. "Sheriff Pike, you put that gun away." She pushed through the ring of silent townsfolk, her face set in a look of pure, undiluted business. She marched right up to Pike, who looked startled. "This man is not a vagrant," Rosalia announced, digging in her apron pocket. "He is my new stockman. I hired him an hour ago to handle the freight in the cellar." She pulled out a heavy silver dollar and pressed it hard into Cole Navarro's hand. "This is your advance. Mr. Navarro, now get to the storeroom. Those beer barrels will not unload themselves." Cole's fingers closed around the coin. He looked at Rosalia, then at Ada. He gave a single, slow nod. He turned his back on the sheriff and walked, not hurried, toward the saloon. Sheriff Pike's face turned a dull, angry red. The charge of vagrancy had just evaporated. He could not arrest an employed man. "Disturbing the peace," he stammered. "He threatened. He did no such thing." Old Man Whitaker's reedy voice piped up from the crowd. "He just stood there. You're the one who pulled a gun. Sheriff." A murmur of agreement ran through the people. Pike, seeing the crowd was not with him, looked from Cole's retreating back to Ada. His eyes were small and hot with malice. "This is not over," he spat, holstering his weapon. "Not by a long shot. This town is under emergency statute." He jabbed a finger at Ada. "And you, teacher, you are consorting with known troublemakers. You had best watch your step." He stormed back to his office, the crowd parting to let him pass. Ada's heart was pounding. The first small crack had appeared in Pike's authority. That night, the three of them met in Rosalia's cellar, a cramped, cool space that smelled of damp earth, whiskey, and pickled eggs. The milepost 341 inches carving was on the table, lit by a single lantern. "They are bringing the pumps by rail," Ada said, her voice low. "They are going to drain the aquifer. We have to know what their plan is. We have to see it." "The rail yard is 10 miles east," Cole said. "It is a restricted area, full of railroad bulls and bragsmen." Tahan, who had been sitting so still in the shadows he seemed a part of them, spoke. "A supply train is due. 2 days. It carries the Iron Heart, as they call it, the big pump." Rosalia, who was counting bottles, spoke without turning. "The yard is hiring kitchen help. My cousin and his new wife were meant to start work this week. They took one look at San Dismas, at Pike's Men and Bragg's water prices, and they took the morning stage back east. Left their work papers right here. She slid 2 folded, grimy documents across the table. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, married 6 months, desperate for work. Sound like anyone you know. Ada looked at Cole. His face was unreadable in the lantern light. A married couple, she said. It is the only way in, Cole said flatly. We will need a good story. You are a failed farmer from Missouri, Rosalia supplied. Your wife here, she is the smart one, does the figures. 2 days later, a buckboard wagon carrying a man and a woman rattled up to the guarded gate of the milepost 341 rail yard. The man looked tired. His shoulders slumped. The woman beside him, in a faded calico dress, looked pale but resolute. Cole reined in the horse. Got papers, he mumbled to the guard, not meeting his eyes. Kitchen work, Smith. The guard, chewing tobacco, looked them over. He grunted, checked the paper, and waved them through. Mess tent is over there, and stay out of the yards. Foreman's office is restricted. The rail yard was a scar of frantic activity. Men shouted, hammers rang on steel, and a small locomotive hissed steam on a siding. Tahan was nowhere to be seen, but as they passed a high fence, Ada saw a fresh, white chalk mark on a post, a single, straight line, an escape route. They spent the morning in the hellish heat of the mess tent kitchen, Ada peeling potatoes and Cole hauling crates of tinned goods. The air was thick with the smell of boiling cabbage and stale grease. Ada watched the main yard office, a small plank building where the foreman, a man with a loud voice and a thick ledger, seemed to live. Their chance came at noon. The foreman bellowed for his lunch. Ada volunteered to take it, carrying a plate of stew and a tin cup of coffee. Cole followed, carrying a heavy sack of flour he was supposedly delivering to the pantry next to the office. Ada went inside. The foreman was at his desk, shouting at a telegraph operator. He grabbed the stew and pointed to a stack of manifests. You, wife, you look like you can read. Check these numbers against this list. My clerk is drunk. Ada's heart leaped. Yes, sir. She sat at the small, cluttered desk. Her eyes scanned the room, and there it was. Not a manifest, but a heavy roll of canvas-backed blueprints, tied with a ribbon. The title block read, San Dismas Silver and Rail Company, Proposed Dam and Aqueduct. Cole stood guard outside the open door, his body blocking the view from the yard. He leaned against the wall, the picture of a tired husband waiting for his wife. The foreman, still arguing with the telegrapher, had his back to her. Ada's hands, slick with sweat, untied the ribbon. She unrolled the plan. It was worse than she had imagined. A thick, concrete dam, a detailed drawing of how it would block the Ghost Spring Aquifer, her father's aquifer. But it did not stop there. It showed a massive pipeline, an aqueduct, diverting 100% of the water not to the town, but 5 miles south, directly to a proposed ore processing reservoir at Silas Bragg's silver mine. Beside the blueprints was another document, sealed bids for construction. It listed 5 companies. Ada recognized every name. They were the shell corporations and holding companies of the same men she had seen in the Coyote's Jaw Saloon. It was not a bid. It was a list of thieves. She could not steal the plans. She looked around, frantic. She saw what she needed: a small box of the architect's tracing paper and a pencil. She pulled a sheet free, laying it over the master plan. She began to trace, her hand moving with the speed and precision of a schoolteacher. She copied the dam, the pipeline, and the title block. The foreman laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Tell them no deal," he shouted. Ada finished. Her eyes landed on the official railroad timestamp on the desk, a heavy, ink-stained metal device. With a shaking hand, she took her tracing, slid it under the stamp, and pressed down. The click and thud was loud in the small room. The ink showed the date and the location, milepost 341. It was proof. She folded the thin paper and slid it into her bodice, just as the foreman turned around. "You done, woman," he grumbled. "Yes, sir," Ada said, standing. "The numbers all match." They walked out into the blinding sunlight, past Cole, who fell into step beside her. They did not speak until they were back in the buckboard, rattling away from the yard. "Did you get it?" he asked, his voice low. Ada patted her chest. "I got it." As they passed the fence line, she saw another chalk mark, 3 parallel lines. "Go now. Danger." Tahan was watching. They rode straight back to San Dismas, the thin piece of paper burning against her skin. She did not wait. She took the blueprint to the emergency town council meeting, held that afternoon in the saloon. The councilmen, 5 merchants who all owed money to Bragg, looked at her with irritation. "Miss Whitlock," said Mr. Davies, the hardware store owner. "We are very busy. The water crisis." "This is the water crisis," Ada said, slapping the tracing paper on the table. "This is Silas Bragg's plan. A dam to steal every drop of water from the aquifer and send it to his mine, while he sells us back our own water at a killer's price." The men looked at the drawing. They looked at each other. Davies cleared his throat. "Miss Whitlock, this is a piece of tracing paper. It is preposterous. It is also, I might add, obtained illegally. It is theft." "It is proof," Ada insisted. "Look at the list of bidders. They are his men." "We see no proof," another councilman said, pushing the paper away. "We see the wild accusations of a young woman who is consorting with disreputable types. This Cowboy. And we hear you were seen consorting with that savage from the Mesa." Ada's blood went hot. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice shaking with controlled fury. "The man you call a savage has more honor than anyone in this room. He taught me to listen to the earth. He is the most civilized man I have met in this town." A man at the back of the room, one of the councilmen, stepped forward. He was a land speculator Ada had never liked. He was squinting at Cole, who stood by the door. "Wait a minute. I know you. Your name is Navarro." Cole's body went still. "I saw you in Cheyenne," the man said, a slow, knowing smile spreading on his face. "You rode guard for the Union Pacific. Heard you were fast with a gun, a mercenary." The room went silent. All eyes turned to Cole. His face was a hard mask. "I rode for pay," he said, his voice flat. "I do not anymore." The speculator laughed. "A hired gun. So this is your case. Miss Whitlock, a hired gun and an Indian lover. You are finished here." Ada looked at Cole, stunned. This was a past he had not shared. This was the stain he carried. It made him a liar in their eyes. The councilmen dismissed her, shaking their heads. She and Cole were forced to leave the saloon, the men's condescending laughter following them into the dusty street. They had not gone 50 yards when they heard the horses. 4 of Pike's deputies, riding hard. There they are. Pike wants them for stealing railroad property. Cole grabbed Ada's arm. "Run! Back to Rosalia's!" They ran, but the horses were faster. They were halfway to the saloon when the deputies cut them off, reining in, surrounding them. "Got you," the lead deputy sneered. "Now, you are coming." A low rumble started, deep in the earth. It grew to a grinding, crashing roar. A wall of rock and dust exploded from the alleyway between the hardware store and the land office, blocking the street. Boulders rolled into the path of the deputies' horses. The animals screamed and reared, throwing 2 of their riders. The pass was completely blocked. From the roof of the saloon, a single sharp puff of white smoke rose into the still air. Tahan's signal, a warning. Go no further. Cole and Ada used the confusion to slip into the back door of Rosalia's. Silas Bragg had lost patience. He had been made a fool of. His plan was out, and the town was on a knife's edge. He needed to break them. He needed to teach them what real fear was. An hour later, Sheriff Pike and 4 deputies marched into Old Man Whitaker's workshop. They dragged the old well-digger out into the street. "Ezra Whitaker," Pike bellowed, "you are under arrest for the willful and malicious sabotage of the San Dismas community. Well, an act of treason in this time of crisis." "That is a lie," Whitaker yelled, struggling. "I dug that well." "The penalty," Pike shouted to the gathering. Horrified crowd, "is death by hanging, to be carried out at noon tomorrow, as an example to all traitors." The next day, the square was silent. A raw new gallows, built from pine from the rail yard, stood in the center. Old Man Whitaker, his hands tied, stood on the platform, a noose around his thin neck. Sheriff Pike was reading the sentence. Silas Bragg watched from the porch of the land office, smoking a cigar. Ada stood in the crowd, tears of rage and helplessness streaming down her face. "Cole," she whispered, "we have to do something." But Cole was gone. Pike finished the document. He nodded to the masked hangman. "Let justice be served." The hangman put his hand on the lever. A sound, sharp as a rifle shot, cracked through the air. It was not a gun. It was the pop of a lariat. The braided horsehair rope flew from the open belfry of the small church across the square. It moved like a living snake, a streak of black and white. It did not loop the hangman. It did not loop the sheriff. It looped the thick hemp noose itself, just above Whitaker's head. The rope went taut, pulling the noose sideways, yanking it away from the old man's throat. Cole, he was in the belfry, the lariat wrapped around his arm, his boots braced against the bell's heavy wooden frame. The hangman, confused, shoved Old Man Whitaker forward. The force, combined with Cole's pull, was too much for the old, dry, rotted belfry frame. With a groan of tortured wood, the massive bronze bell tore loose from its housing. It crashed down, trailing Cole's lariat, and smashed onto the gallows platform. The structure exploded in a shower of splintered pine. Whitaker was thrown clear, landing in the soft dust, the broken noose still harmlessly attached to the bell. The crowd, shocked silent for a beat, let out a massive, single roar. Cole was already gone. Vanishing down the back of the church, Pike, his face a mask of purple fury, was screaming, "Find him! Find him! Get me the territorial marshals! I want reinforcements!" He had lost the town. They met hours later, in the deep, dark cellar. Cole had a bleeding gash on his forehead, struck by a piece of flying wood as the bell fell. "Hold still," Ada said. She was trembling, the reaction to the day's horror and triumph hitting her all at once. She brought a small sewing kit from Rosalia. "This needs a stitch, or it will scar." She threaded the needle, her fingers shaking so much she could barely do it. She dipped the needle in whiskey. "It is just a scratch," Cole said, but he did not move. He sat on a barrel, watching her. "Hold still," she said again, her voice soft. She put her hand on his jaw to steady his head. Her skin was cool. He did not flinch. She pushed the needle through his skin. Her hand was trembling. He watched her, his dark eyes focused only on her face. "If you are planning to save my life, teacher," he said, his voice a low, dry rumble, "you might at least try to sew straight." Ada stopped. She looked up, startled, into his eyes. A slow, faint smile was playing at the corners of his mouth. It was the first time she had ever seen it. It transformed his hard face, lighting it from within. Her own lips quivered. She felt a sudden, sharp knot in her throat. She smiled back. "I will do my best, Cowboy." A shadow moved in the stairwell. Tahan. He stepped into the light, his face grim. He had been listening to the earth again, far out on the plain. "They are not waiting for the marshals." Tahan said, "The engines are coming. The machines. The snake is moving." He looked at Ada, then Cole. "The night the greedy dig their claws into the earth, the water snake will rise." Outside, A low rumble of thunder rolled across the dry, parched sky. It brought no rain. It was just the sound of the coming storm. The gallows, or what was left of it, was gone by sundown. The broken bell lay half buried in the dust of the town square, a bronze testament to the day's chaos. The town was buzzing, electric with a fear that was finally turning into anger. Sheriff Pike's reinforcements had not arrived. The telegraph wire had been cut, 10 miles east of town. Tahan had been busy. San Dismas was on its own, caught between Bragg's greed and the dry, empty sky. They needed water, but they also needed hope. It was Rosalia who provided it. She put a sign on the saloon door. "Dance and fundraiser tonight, old warehouse. To repair our town well. Fiddle and whiskey. All proceeds for the community." It was a brilliant move. It was not a protest, it was a social event. It was not rebellion, it was a community service. Even Pike, fuming in his office, could not arrest the entire town for holding a barn dance. By nightfall, the old, dusty freight warehouse was transformed. It had been swept clean. Lanterns hung from the rafters, dozens of them, casting a warm, yellow glow. Bales of hay were stacked for seating. A fiddler and a man with a guitar were tuning up on a stage made of freight pallets. The place smelled of clean hay, lamp oil, and the sharp, hopeful scent of Rosalia's whiskey punch. People came. They came in their Sunday best, or their only patched clothes. They came because they were thirsty. Yes, but also because they were tired of being afraid. They needed to stand together, even if it was just to tap their feet to a fiddle tune. Ada arrived with Old Man Whitaker on her arm. She had washed her face and put on her best dress, a simple dark blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She felt the stares, but for the first time, they were not all hostile. They were curious. They were measuring her, the woman who had faced down Bragg, who had been seen with the cowboy, who had been rescued by the bell. Then the music started, a lively reel. The floor filled, but after the first song, the fiddler slowed the tempo, sliding into the sweet, gliding notes of a waltz. And the moment came. The town's gentlemen saw their duty. This was Ada Whitlock, the schoolteacher, the town clerk. She was, despite the rumors, the closest thing San Dismas had to respectable leadership. The councilman, the merchants, the lawyer from the land office, they saw a chance to align themselves with the new, shifting center of power. Mr. Davies, the hardware man, stepped up first, then the young lawyer, then the banker's son, one by one. They formed a small, shuffling line, each man clearing his throat, ready to ask for the honor of the first waltz. A dozen gentlemen, lined up. Ada looked at them. She saw Mr. Davies, who had called Tahan a savage. She saw the land speculator who had tried to expose Cole as a mercenary. She saw the men who had been willing to let her fail, who had sat silent while Bragg choked the town. Her gaze drifted past them, past the dancers, to the shadows by the wide-open warehouse doors. Cole Navarro stood there. He had not come to dance. He was on watch, his dark coat blending into the night, his hat pulled low. The small, neat stitch she had made on his forehead was a pale line against his sun-darkened skin. He was watching the crowd, watching the doors, watching for Pike, or Bragg's men. He did not belong in here, with the music and the laughter. He was the guard at the gate. He expected nothing. Ada smiled, a small, private smile. She looked at the first man in line, Mr. Davies, who was holding out his hand. She politely, but firmly, put her own hand on his arm and moved him gently to the side. She walked past the second man, past the third. She walked past all 12 of them. The music wavered for a second as the fiddler watched, confused. The entire warehouse went quiet, the dancers stopping, the whispers dying. Ada walked straight across the wooden floor, her boots making a solitary, determined sound. She walked right up to the shadow in the doorway. She stopped in front of Cole. He looked up, startled, his eyes wide in the lantern light. He had been so focused on the outside. He had not seen her coming. She did not say a word. She simply held out her hand. Cole stared at her hand. It was a teacher's hand, clean, with ink stains on the fingers. It was also the hand that had poured powder into his wound, the hand that had held Tahan's staff. He looked at her face. She was not mocking him. She was not challenging him. She was inviting him. After a beat that seemed to last a year, he slowly, almost reluctantly, removed his hat. He took her hand. A collective gasp went through the room. Rosalia, at the punch bowl, let out a low, satisfied laugh. Cole let her lead him to the center of the floor. The fiddler, taking his cue, started the waltz again, soft and slow. Cole put his hand on her waist. It felt strange, like holding a bird. He was stiff, awkward. He was a man made for saddles and rock faces, not dance floors. "Teacher," he rumbled, his voice low and rough. "I do not know how to do this." "Neither do I," Ada whispered, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Just walk with me. 3 steps." He took a step. She followed. He took another. His other hand held hers, his palm rough and calloused against her own. It was not the light, polite touch of a dance partner. It was a grip, the same grip that had snatched her from the air at the edge of the mesa. They began to move. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. He was a natural rider, and he had a rider's innate balance. He was not graceful, but he was steady. He was strong. The rustle of her cotton skirt brushed against his denim trousers. She could feel the solid warmth of him, the steady, slow beat of his heart through his shirt. She looked up at his face. He was looking down at her, his expression no longer guarded, but filled with a quiet, profound astonishment. They did not speak. They did not need to. In that dance, in the space of 3 steps, repeated over and over, a promise was made. It was a promise of loyalty, a recognition. The town watched and understood. This was not a flirtation. This was an alliance. When the music ended, he did not let go immediately. He just held her for a second, in the middle of the floor, in the middle of all those eyes. Then he nodded once, a gesture of deep respect, and released her. He put his hat back on and melted back into the shadows by the door. Rosalia was at Ada's elbow instantly. "Walk with me, querida." She guided Ada away from the floor, toward the back storeroom. That was good. That the whole town understands better than 100 blueprints. She pushed open the door to a small, cluttered office at the back of the warehouse. "But this," Rosalia said, "this is for Bragg." She took a heavy iron key from her apron and unlocked a tall, battered filing cabinet. "Silas Bragg thinks I am just a woman who serves drinks. He forgets I have been here longer than he has. He forgets I keep my own books." She pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. "This," she said, "is Bragg's shadow. Every debt he owes, every marker he holds, every man in this town he has paid off, and every man who owes him. He thinks this room is just for my old liquor receipts. He is a fool." Ada opened the book. Her fingers traced the lines of neat, spidery script. It was all there. Payments to Sheriff Pike, loans to 2 of the councilmen, a secret contract with a land speculator. It was the leverage he used to own the town. "He will be looking for this," Rosalia said. "Now that you have pushed him, he will try to clean his house. You must use it, fast." Later that night, the 3 of them met in the cellar. The ledger was open on the table between them. "This is the proof," Ada said, her voice electric. "This is what the federal judge will need to see. This, with my tracing of the dam, proves conspiracy." "It proves," Cole said, his voice flat, "that he is a snake, but the law loves snakes with money." "The law," Tahan said, "is not just what is written on paper." He had been listening, silent, as Ada read from the ledger. "Your law is new. It is bought and sold." He drew a line in the damp earth of the cellar floor with his finger. "Before your law, there was the Spanish law. Before that, my people's law. The Spanish law knew about thirst. They had a law for the acequia. The community ditch, Ada said, looking up, the idea striking her like lightning. The old laws, the Mexican land grants, they state that water is not private property. It belongs to the ditch, to the community that digs it. It cannot be sold. It cannot be hoarded. It is an older law than the territory. Tahan said, older than the railroad, older than Bragg. A new plan formed, sharp and clear. 2 attacks, Ada said. First, the law. I will file a formal complaint with a federal circuit judge. He is in Santa Fe. I will cite the acequia rights, based on the original land grant. I will ask for an emergency injunction to stop the dam. And the second attack? Cole asked. Public, Ada said, her hand resting on the ledger. We will not let him hide. We will show the town who he is. We will post these debts in the square for everyone to see. The next morning, the town woke to a new notice. Not from Ada, but from Sheriff Pike. It was nailed to the church door, where everyone would see it. It was an affidavit, signed by one of Pike's deputies. It did not mention water. It did not mention the dam. It accused Ada Whitlock of public lewdness and lascivious carriage, conduct unbecoming a teacher. It described her dance with Cole Navarro as a disgraceful and whorish display, inciting moral collapse. It was a formal charge, filed with the territorial court. Silas Bragg had played his card. He could not attack her on the facts, so he would destroy her name. Ada stood before the notice, her face pale. She heard the whispers. She saw the women of the town pulling their children away from her. This was a deeper wound than any bullet. She turned, her shoulders slumped, and walked back toward the schoolhouse. But the door was blocked. Old Man Whitaker was standing there, and behind him, Rosalia, and behind her, the blacksmith, and the livery owner, and a dozen other townsfolk. They were not jeering. Their faces were hard with anger. Miss Whitlock, Whitaker said, his reedy voice cracking. That Pike, he is a foul man, a lying, foul man. Rosalia stepped forward and tore the notice from the church door. She crumpled it in her fist. He tried to hang you, Ezra, she said, her voice loud enough for the whole square to hear. She danced with a man. He tried to hang an innocent man. Who here thinks dancing is the greater sin? A low murmur of agreement. The smear had backfired. Bragg had overplayed his hand. He had shown them his true face, and it was ugly. The town had been pushed too far. They were not afraid of Ada anymore. They were furious for her. That night, Ada and Cole sat on the roof of the livery, watching the town. The air was tense, waiting. They will come for us soon, Cole said, scanning the darkness. He will not take this lightly. Why do you stay? Ada asked, her voice quiet. You could be 100 miles from here, free. This is not your fight. Cole was silent for a long time, watching the dark shape of the mesa against the stars. I told you I rode for pay, he said, for the railroad. We were protecting the crews, driving settlers off their land, driving others off their land. I was good at it. He looked at his hands. I took their money, and I did not feel anything. That was the worst part. Ada waited. My mother, he said, his voice softer. She was Comanche. She was taken. My father, a vaquero. He found her. He said he rescued her. She always said she rescued him from being a fool. He touched the horsehair lariat coiled at his belt. She made this. When she gave it to me, she told me the world would try to make me hard. It would tell me to take, to catch, to hold. But this rope, this is for saving. Do not use it to catch a man, Mijo, she said. Use it to save one. He looked at her, his eyes unreadable in the dark. I'm trying to use it right. Ada felt a profound, aching connection to this man, this outsider. She, too, was an orphan, holding on to the one thing her parents had left her. My mother, Ada said, her voice barely a whisper. She died of thirst. We were traveling from Illinois. The wagon axle broke. My father went for help. He was too late. I was 8. I sat with her for 2 days. I watched her die, watching the horizon for my father. That's why, Cole, I will not let brag make people thirsty. I will not let anyone die watching an empty horizon, not while I have breath. He nodded, a slow, deep understanding passing between them. They were not so different, both of them, marked by the past, trying to save the future. The next morning, Ada wrote the complaint. She gave it to the young stage line rider, the one she trusted, with a gold coin from Rosalia's cellar. Ride to Santa Fe. Do not stop. Give this only to the hand of the federal judge. The rider nodded and galloped out of town. The legal trap was set. That evening, they gathered in the cellar for the last time. The ledger was ready to be posted. The town was ready to stand with them. Tahan was not looking at the book. He was standing in the corner, his hand pressed flat against the damp cellar wall, his eyes closed. "Tahan," Ada asked. He held up a hand for silence. He was listening. A low, deep vibration, fainter than a heartbeat, was coming from the earth. It was not the sound of water. It was the rhythmic, heavy pound of machinery. He opened his eyes. They were grim. "The Iron Heart," he said. "It is not coming in 2 days. It is not coming tomorrow." He looked at Cole, then at Ada. "It is here." The sound of the steam engine, distant but unmistakable, cut through the cellar's damp air. Tahan's words. "It is here," extinguished all talk of ledgers and town squares. The immediate plan, the posting of debts, dissolved. The final battle had arrived, not on their terms, but on Silas Bragg's. They moved without discussion, a single organism driven by the new iron rhythm. Rosalia, her face grim, did not panic. She produced the carbon paper Ada had asked for. Then she added something else, pulling a small, oilcloth-wrapped package from a hidden cupboard. "Minor signals," she said, her voice flat. "Old stock. They make a lot of light, a lot of noise. If you need a distraction, this is it." They rode. The moon was low, casting long, skeletal shadows. They did not ride as a couple in a buckboard, but as 3 ghosts, their horses' hooves muffled in the sandy soil. Tahan peeled away from them a mile from the rail yard, vanishing into the rocky terrain that flanked the tracks. He was moving toward the rail switch, the metal joint that would decide the train's path. Ada Whitlock and Cole Navarro dismounted at the perimeter fence of milepost 341. The yard was not dark. It was alive with lamplight and nervous energy. A special train sat on the main siding, hissing steam. It was short in engine, a long flat car, and a single caboose. On the flat car sat a colossal shape, shrouded in heavy canvas, the Iron Heart. Guards patrolled the perimeter, rifles glinting. Cole looked at Ada. His face was a hard mask in the moonlight. "Give me 10 minutes, then make them look up." 10 minutes, she said, her voice steady. He was gone. Not a man, but a patch of darkness moving between other patches of darkness. Ada watched him flow over a stack of barrels, slide behind a water tower, and disappear into the chaos of the yard. She clutched the signal flares. She climbed, not toward the yard, but up, onto a high, dark slag heap that overlooked the entire scene. She found her perch. She waited. Cole moved with the cold patience of a hunter. The engine's low. Rumbling hiss covered the sound of his boots on the gravel. He slipped past a pair of guards arguing, moved under the belly of a boxcar, and emerged on the far side, next to the flat car. He pulled himself up. He was on board. He crouched beside the canvas monster. He looked toward the slag heap. He raised his hand, a brief flash of his palm in the lantern light. The signal. Ada struck the fuse. She aimed the first flare not at the train, but high into the black sky above the yard. It shot upward with a demonic, whistling scream, a streak of piercing red. It exploded in a shower of scarlet stars that lit the ground like daylight. "Attack!" a guard shouted. "They are in the hills!" Ada lit the second one, a blue flare, and sent it arching over the bunkhouse. The yard erupted in panic. Men scrambled for cover. Guards raised their rifles toward the hills, firing at shadows. In the chaos, Tahan moved. He reached the rail switch. It was heavy. The lever secured with a thick chain and a heavy brass lock. He did not have a key. He had a long iron pry bar, taken from the livery. He wedged the bar into the mechanism. He put his entire weight on it, his muscles straining. The lock protested, groaned, and then snapped with a sharp crack. Tahan threw his shoulder against the heavy lever. The metal shrieked as he forced the tracks to move, shunting the line away from the open prairie and onto the siding that led to the old, towering salt warehouse. The train's whistle shrieked. The engineer, following orders to evacuate at any sign of trouble, opened the throttle. The massive wheels spun, caught, and the train began to move. Cole was not alone. One guard, a veteran of the railroad wars, had not run for the hills. He had run for the train. He climbed up the far side of the flat car. He saw Cole. He raised his rifle. Ada saw it all from her perch. The train was picking up speed. She could not let Cole fight alone. She scrambled down the slag heap, her skirt tearing on the sharp rock. She ran, her legs pumping, cutting straight through the panicked yard. She did not hesitate. She grabbed the ladder on the side of the last car, the caboose, and swung herself up. She clawed her way up the ladder to the flat roof. The wind hit her like a solid wall. It tore her hair from its pins, whipping it across her face. The engine stacked through a plume of hot, stinging sparks that swirled around her like angry fireflies. Ahead, on the flat car, she saw the two men, Cole and the guard, grappling in the swaying, unsteady light. Cole broke free, shoving the man back. He saw her. His face, for one instant, was a mask of pure, uncomprehending terror. For her. The guard recovered, raising his rifle again, taking aim at Cole. Cole's hand moved. A blur of motion. The horsehair lariat was in his grip. He did not throw it. He snapped it like a whip. The heavy braided loop caught the guard's wrist, deflecting the gun just as it fired. The bullet sang harmlessly into the night. Cole yanked the lariat, pulling the man off balance. Cole was moving backward, toward Ada, toward the caboose. The guard, untangling himself, lunged. Cole sidestepped the attack, but his boot heel caught on the edge of a loose plank. He stumbled, his arms flailing for balance. He fell backward, off the edge of the speeding train. Ada screamed his name. It was a sound swallowed by the clatter of the wheels. He did not fall all the way. He had caught the iron handrail of the flat car with one hand. He was hanging, dragging, his boots skipping and bouncing on the jagged gravel of the railbed. He could not get a foothold. He could not pull himself up. The guard was turning, seeing his chance. Cole still had the lariat in his other hand. He looked up, his face a mask of straining agony. He saw her, flat on the roof, her arms stretched out. "Ada!" he shouted, his voice a raw tearing. "Catch!" He threw the loose end of the lariat. It sailed up, a black and white snake, and slapped against the roof. Ada lunged. Grabbing it, she wrapped it around her wrist, around both arms, bracing her feet against the cupola. She was not strong enough to pull him up, but she could be his anchor. He looked up at her, hanging between life and the thundering wheels. His voice was a raw shout against the roar. "Do not let go!" She leaned over the edge, her hair flying, her face streaked with soot. "I will not leave you!" she screamed back. The guard, seeing them, moved closer. But Tahan, who had leaped from the ground to the side of a slow-moving cattle car, had been pacing them. He was not on the train, but beside it, he saw the guard. He picked up a piece of scrap iron from the car. He threw it. It spun, end over end, and struck the guard square in the back of the head. The man crumpled and was gone. Cole used the taut lariat, He found a hold with his feet on the undercarriage. He grunted, his muscles bunching, and hauled himself, hand over hand, back onto the flat car. He did not rest. He scrambled onto the caboose roof and collapsed next to Ada. They lay flat, the wind screaming over them. He looked at her. "You," he panted, "are a magnificent fool." She just shook her head, her breath sobbing in her chest. "The office," he said, pointing down. "We have to get in." He found the small access hatch on the roof cupola. It was locked. He did not hesitate. He smashed the glass with his boot heel. He dropped down into the caboose. He turned and caught Ada as she dropped after him. The car was empty. It was a neat, functional office, a desk, a telegraph key, and in the wall, a bolted iron safe. Cole looked at it. Bragg is an arrogant man. He said he spun the dial. 1876. He pulled the handle. The heavy door swung open with a well-oiled click. Inside was not gold. It was paper. On top, a thick, vellum document. Ada pulled it out. "Contract," she read, her voice shaking. "San Dismas Silver and Rail Company. Exclusive rights, all subterranean water sources, municipal claim transferred." She turned the page, and there they were, the signatures, Silas Bragg, Sheriff Pike, and below them, the names of all 5 town councilmen. "We have it," she whispered. She pulled the carbon paper from the bodice of her dress. Rosalia. She grabbed a blank shipping manifest from the desk. She began to write, her hand flying, the carbon paper underneath, tracing the entire document, every word, every damning signature. Far behind them, Tahan had dealt with his own problem. A sniper, left by Bragg on a high ridge, had been taking careful shots at the train. Tahan had circled him in the darkness. He had moved without sound. A spirit of the rocks. The sniper was watching the caboose, waiting for a clean shot. He never heard Tahan. The fight was short, brutal, and silent. It was hand to hand. Tahan was a blur of focused motion. He did not use his knife to kill. He used his hands, his knowledge of the body. He struck the man's neck. The sniper went limp, unconscious. Tahan bound him with his own belt. He would leave him for the federal law. The train, its path diverted by Tahan's switch, screeched and groaned as it entered the siding. It clattered past the towering dark mountain of the salt warehouse and slammed to a halt at the end of the line. The silence, after the roar, was deafening. But the yard was already responding. Pike, furious, had seen the train divert. He had seen the flares. He and 6 deputies were riding hard toward the siding. They reined in their horses, blocking the only exit. Cole and Ada climbed down from the caboose. They were trapped. "Well, well," Pike's voice boomed. He aimed his pistol, not at Cole, but directly at Ada's chest. "End of the line. Teacher, give me the papers." Cole froze. He had his lariat. Ada held the carbon copy, the proof, in her hand. Pike's men fanned out, their guns all trained on the 2 of them. "Give them to me, Miss Whitlock," Pike ordered. "The originals from the safe, and your little copy." Cole looked at Ada. He looked at the paper in her hand. He saw the 6 guns. He had to choose, the evidence that would save the town, or the woman who held it. He chose the woman. He did not attack. He turned. He ran. He sprinted away from Ada, away from Pike, running straight toward the main station house 100 yards away. "Get him!" Pike screamed. The deputies turned, firing at the fleeing shadow. Bullets kicked up dust and sparks at Cole's feet. He was drawing their fire. He reached the station platform in a desperate leap, threw his body at the wall, and grabbed the heavy iron handle of the yard's main steam alarm. He yanked it down with all his weight. A sound of unbelievable force ripped through the night, a high, piercing, continuous shriek that echoed off the mesas, that shook the windows in San Dismas. It was the sound of fire, of attack, of disaster. It would wake every soul for 10 miles. In the second that the deputies were distracted, Tahan moved. He came from the shadows of the warehouse, a blur. He grabbed Ada around the waist, lifting her off her feet. He ran, not toward Cole, but into the deep shadow of the salt warehouse. Pike roared in rage and fired into the darkness. And then the wind hit. It was not a storm. It was a judgment, as if summoned by the whistle. The sky fell, a solid wall of red-brown dust. The storm Tahan had sensed slammed into the rail yard. The world vanished. The lanterns, the train, the men all disappeared in a churning, suffocating, stinging cloud. The yard exploded into total chaos. Bunkhouse doors flew open. Workers, blind and choking, stumbled out. A woman, the cook's wife, ran from the mess tent, her arms clutching a small, bundled child. She tripped on a loose rail, falling hard. The child, a boy of 3, tumbled from her arms, landing in the gravel, screaming in terror. He was lost, directly in the path of the deputies who were trying to ride blind. One of Pike's men, a young deputy from the valley, saw the small shape. He saw Pike, his face a mask of fury, raising his pistol to fire blindly into the brown cloud where Ada and Tahan had vanished. "No!" the deputy shouted, his voice hoarse. He turned his horse, blocking Pike's aim. He leaned down, sweeping the crying child up from the ground, and pushed the boy back into the arms of his mother. It was a single, small act of decency in the heart of the madness. Cole used the storm. He was an animal in his own element. He circled back, blind, feeling his way. He found the salt warehouse. Tahan was there. Ada huddled beside him. The evidence was safe. Ada had the carbon copy clutched in her hand. But Cole sagged against the wall. His breath was coming in a low, sharp hiss. Ada saw the dark stain spreading across his side. He was hit. "Down!" she commanded, pulling him to the ground. The wind howled around them, a screaming chorus. She tore another long strip from her petticoat. The bullet had grazed his ribs, deeper than the last one. It was bleeding, fast. She pressed the cloth hard against the wound, her whole body shaking. He grunted, the pain sharp. He looked at her, in the dim churning red light of the storm. She was a warrior. Her hair was a wild nest of tangles. Her face was black with soot and grime. Her dress was in tatters. She leaned close, her mouth next to his ear, her voice desperate to be heard over the storm. "When this is over," she shouted, "when this is all over, we will talk." It was a promise of a future. He nodded, his face pale and tight with pain. He clamped his own hand over hers, holding the bandage in place. They huddled together, the 3 of them, hidden by the anger of the earth itself, as the world tore itself apart around them. The dust storm raged for 2 hours, and then, as if a great door had slammed shut, it stopped. The world that emerged was new, raw, and choked. A thick, reddish-brown powder covered everything, inches deep. The air was still and cool, the sun a pale, sickly disk behind a veil of high dust. San Dismas looked like a town buried alive. Out of this silence came the sound of a wagon, a single heavy-duty carriage, drawn by 4 tired horses, rolled slowly into the town square. A man in a black dust-covered suit sat inside, holding a carpet bag on his lap. He was followed by 2 riders, heavily armed, their faces grim. They were not territorial marshals, they were federal. The man stepped out of the carriage, looked at the broken bell, the shattered gallows, and the silent, staring faces of the townsfolk who emerged from their homes, blinking in the strange light. "I am Judge Elias Thorne," he announced, his voice dry as the dust at his feet. "I received a petition from a Miss Ada Whitlock. I am here to hold a hearing. The stage writer from Santa Fe had made it. The law, the real law, had arrived. The hearing was held then and there, in the open square, with the broken bell as their witness. The townsfolk gathered, a silent, grim circle. Silas Bragg appeared, his fine suit stained brown, his face a mask of confident indignation. Sheriff Pike stood beside him, his hand on his gun, his eyes red and raw from the wind. Ada Whitlock stepped forward. Her dress was in tatters, her hair a wild, matted tangle. Her face was streaked with soot and grime, but her eyes were clear. Tahan stood a few paces behind her, a silent, watchful shadow. Cole Navarro leaned against the wall of Rosalia's saloon, his hand pressed tight to his bandaged side, his face pale, but his gaze locked on Pike. "Judge Thorne," Ada began, her voice hoarse but carrying in the still air. "I accuse Silas Bragg and Sheriff Pike of conspiracy, attempted murder, and the theft of this town's water and its future." She presented her proof. She laid the thin, carbon copy of the train contract on the judge's makeshift desk. She laid Rosalia's thick ledger open beside it. "A forged copy and a barmaid's tally book," Bragg scoffed, laughing. "This is desperation. Your Honor, this is the fantasy of a hysterical woman." The judge read the documents, his face impassive. He looked at the councilmen named in the ledger. They shuffled their feet, their faces turning from pale to sick. "This is a serious accusation, Miss Whitlock," the judge said. "And it is a lie," Bragg shouted, stepping forward. He was done with civility. "This woman, this teacher, has fallen. She has abandoned all decency. She has formed a savage alliance with this drifter." He jabbed a finger at Cole. "And this redskin." He turned to the crowd. "She is not fit to teach your children. She is not fit to live among you. I have proof of her moral collapse." He produced a small card, a photograph. He held it up. "Behold your town clerk." The crowd gasped. The photograph was grainy, but the image was clear. It showed Ada, her dress undone, in the arms of a man in the shadows of the livery. It was obscene. It was damning. Ada's face went bone white. She felt as if she had been struck. "That is not real. That is a lie." "The camera does not lie, Miss Whitlock," Bragg sneered, handing the photograph to the judge. The judge studied it, his brow furrowing. "Oh, the camera does not lie." A new voice rang out. "But the man behind it sure as hell can." Rosalia pushed through the crowd. With her was a small, nervous man carrying a heavy wooden box. "This is Mr. Tibbs," Rosalia announced. "The photographer from Silver City. He was here last week, at Mr. Bragg's invitation. Tell the judge what you told me. Mr. Tibbs." Tibbs, his hands shaking, stepped forward. "It is a composite, Your Honor," he stammered. "A trick. 2 photographs, put together as one. Mr. Bragg paid me to make it. He said it was a political joke. That is Miss Whitlock's face. Yes, from a portrait I took of her at the schoolhouse. But that is not her body. He made me. He forced me to print it. I left town. I was so ashamed. But Mistress Rosalia, she found me." A low, animal sound growled from the crowd. The women, the mothers who had pulled their children away, now stared at Silas Bragg with a hatred that was cold and pure. He had not just attacked Ada. He had insulted them all. The judge looked at Bragg. "This," he said, his voice like chipping ice, "is a federal offense, attempting to tamper with a witness." "This is not your jurisdiction," Bragg roared, his composure shattering. "This is a local dispute." "Water is a federal concern," the judge said calmly. "And the original land grants?" "The land grants say nothing," Bragg shouted. "They say everything." Tahan stepped forward. He moved from the shadow into the light. He carried no weapon. He carried a rolled piece of hide, old and brittle. He laid it on the judge's desk. "This," Tahan said, his voice quiet but reaching every ear, "is the law, before your law." The judge unrolled it. It was a map. It was drawn in faded inks, part Spanish, part pictograph. It showed the valley, the mesa, and the web of springs. And it showed the acequia, the community ditch that Ada's father had built upon. A line of Spanish script was written at the bottom. The judge read it aloud. El agua es de la comunidad. No es para vender, es para todos. He looked at the crowd. The water belongs to the community. It is not for sale. It is for all. He looked at Tahan. This is a recognized Spanish land grant charter. It predates the territorial treaty. It is binding. The legal heir had vanished. Bragg was ruined. The complex structure of his greed, built on paper and lies, had been washed away. Ada looked at Silas Bragg. He was a man hollowed out, his eyes wide with the shock of his own defeat. She felt no triumph, only a vast, cold pity. "You do not thirst for water, Mr. Bragg," she said, her voice not loud, but clear. "You thirst for power, and now you have neither." It was too much for Pike. The law, his badge, his authority. It was all turning to ash. He saw the prison cell. He saw the end of his world. With a desperate animal cry, he made his move. He did not go for Ada. He did not go for Cole. He went for the source of his ruin. He pulled his pistol from its holster and aimed it, at point-blank range, at the chest of federal judge Elias Thorne. It happened faster than a thought. Cole Navarro, wounded, pale, leaning against the wall, exploded into motion. He was not a man. He was a force. He launched himself across the 10 feet of open space. There was no time to draw a gun. There was no time to tackle. The horsehair lariat, the one his mother had braided, was in his hand. It uncoiled, a black and white streak. It did not loop. It flew straight, like a weighted line. It snapped taut, wrapping itself around Pike's wrist, the gun, and his forearm, all in one blurred motion. Cole yanked. He put all his weight, all his rage, all his life into that single pull. The gun fired. The bullet went harmlessly into the sky. Pike screamed as his wrist and fingers snapped, the gun clattering to the dust. The crowd, which had surged back in terror, now surged forward in a wave of fury. But they did not go for Pike. Pike's remaining deputies, their faces white with shock, raised their rifles, not at the crowd, but at nothing. They were trapped. Old Man Whitaker, his voice cracking, stepped in front of them. He held a large wrench. "No more," the old man said. Rosalia stood beside him. Then the blacksmith, holding his hammer. Then a dozen more. The mothers, the shopkeepers, the miners. They formed a silent, solid wall. They stood between Pike and Ada. They stood between the failed law and the new community. "The law here," Rosalia said, her voice shaking but strong, "is water for the thirsty, and we are done being thirsty." As she spoke, the first drop of rain hit the dust at her feet. Another followed, and another. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. They tilted their faces to the sky, their mouths open. A fat, heavy, impossible drop of rain struck Ada's cheek. It traced a clean line through the soot, like a tear. The sky opened. It was not a storm. It was a release, a steady cleansing. Life-giving rain began to fall. It drummed on the tin roofs. It hissed in the thick dust, turning the brown powder into dark, rich mud. The smell of wet earth, the smell of life, rose in the air, so thick it was almost edible. The rain washed the grime from their faces. It soaked their clothes, and as it ran in rivulets through the town square, it began to wash the dust away from the base of the broken gallows. A patch of bright, impossible green was uncovered, then a dark, wet stone, and from a crack in the stone, a small, clear gurgle of water began to bubble up. It was the old town spring, the one that had been declared dry for 20 years, now choked and hidden by dust. The rain and the deep vibrations of the earth had broken it free. The crowd stared, silent. It was a miracle. Judge Thorne, His black suit soaked, his hair plastered to his head, pointed a finger, not at Pike, but at the two armed federal men with him. "Sergeant," he commanded, his voice booming over the rain. "Arrest Sheriff Pike for the attempted murder of a federal judge, and arrest that man." He pointed at the stunned, defeated Silas Bragg. "For conspiracy, fraud, and a list of charges I will spend a week writing." The two men were put in handcuffs, in the middle of the square, in the pouring rain. Bragg looked empty. Pike just looked broken. Cole Navarro stood, his arm still aching from the throw. The lariat, its work done, fell from his wrist. He unhooked it from Pike's broken hand and slowly recoiled it. It was no longer a tool to save himself. He had saved another. He had saved the law. He looked at Ada. She was standing in the rain, her face turned to the sky, tears mixing with the water. She was laughing, a quiet, sobbing laugh. She walked over to him, through the mud, through the celebrating, weeping crowd. She did not touch him. She just stood in front of him, the rain streaming from her hair. She looked at the blood staining his shirt, at the weariness in his eyes. She stepped closer. She laid her forehead against his, a simple, profound touch, skin to skin. She was warm, despite the cold rain. He closed his eyes. He smelled the rain and the scent of her hair, and the faint, coppery smell of his own blood. "I chose you," she whispered, her voice so low only he could hear it. "From the moment we shook hands, by the broken wagon, I chose you then." He said nothing. He just breathed, his hand still on the coiled lariat, his body finally, truly, at rest. The rain fell all night, a cleansing, steady drumbeat that washed the world clean. By morning, the air was sharp and cool, and the town of San Dismas was a map of mud and fresh puddles. Judge Elias Thorne did not wait for the sun. He resumed his hearing on the covered porch of the general store, his desk a dry goods barrel. His federal men stood guard over the town jail, where Silas Bragg and Sheriff Pike sat in stunned, damp silence. The judge, his voice crisp in the clean air, issued his first order. Based on the authority of the United States government and the precedent of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, this court affirms the ancient acequia rights of this valley. The water charter presented by Tahan is found to be legal and binding. The water belongs to the community. The attempted seizure of these rights by the San Dismas Silver and Rail Company is hereby null and void. He looked at the townsfolk, who stood in the wet street, their faces stunned with hope. This court also finds that the existing town council has acted in gross negligence and criminal conspiracy. He looked at the 5 councilmen, huddled together like wet rats. "I am dissolving the San Dismas Town Council, effective immediately." A gasp went up. This was more than they had hoped for. The judge was cleaning the slate. "In its place," Judge Thorne continued, "I am establishing a provisional community water council to govern the fair and equitable distribution of this valley's water until such time as a new election can be held." He pointed. Rosalia, Ezra Whitaker, Ada Whitlock. He then turned, his gaze respectful, to the man who stood apart, watching. "And a permanent seat on this council will be reserved for a representative of the first inhabitants of this land, Tahan. Will you accept?" Tahan did not look at the judge. He looked at the people. He looked at the new, clean spring bubbling in the square. He gave a single, slow nod. The law of the earth and the law of the paper, for one brief, fragile moment, were the same. The federal judge was efficient. He spent the morning taking depositions, building his case against Bragg and Pike. He intended to take them to Santa Fe in the morning. But Silas Bragg was not a man who surrendered. He was a creature of contingency. From his cell, he watched the day's activity. He saw the young deputy, the one who had saved the child during the dust storm. He saw the boy's conflicted face, his unease with the new, swift justice. That afternoon, the deputy brought Bragg his meal. Bragg did not touch the food. He sat on the cot, his voice low and reasonable. "You have a good face, son," Bragg said, his tone paternal. "You are not like Pike. You are a man of conscience." "Just doing my duty," the deputy mumbled. "Of course you are. But this is not justice. It is a federal takeover. That judge, he is a zealot. He is ruining the future of this town. My mine would have brought 1,000 jobs. 1,000. He leaned forward. "I have a wife, son, a family. They will be ruined. All I am asking is for a message, a simple business message to my foreman at the mine." "I cannot do that. Mr. Bragg, I am under orders." Bragg slid a heavy $20 gold piece across the floor. "I am not asking you to break the law, just to deliver a message. Tell my foreman, tell him, Plan B is in effect. That is all. It is a simple administrative instruction, so my men can be paid. You would not see 100 men go without their wages, would you?" The deputy stared at the coin. It was more than 2 months' pay. He thought of Bragg's wife, a woman he had never seen. He thought of the 100 miners. He looked at Bragg's earnest, desperate face. He picked up the coin. "Plan B," he said. "That is all." "That is all," Bragg said, smiling, as the deputy left. The town, exhausted and soaked in relief, went to sleep early. The rain had stopped. The air was calm. Cole Navarro was asleep in a chair in Rosalia's back room, his wounds finally, truly, tended to. Ada was in her small room above the schoolhouse. The first shout came just after midnight. "Fire, by the gods! Fire!" Ada was out of her bed in an instant. She looked out her window. The eastern sky was not dark. It was a hellish, pulsing red, the half-built framework of Silas Bragg's dam. 10 miles away at milepost 341 was a blazing inferno. She was dressed and in the street in 2 minutes. The town was pouring out of its homes, panicking. "It is Bragg," a man shouted. "He is burning it all." "He is framing us," Ada realized, her blood running cold. "The judge is still here. He will think we did this. He will think we are anarchists." Cole was suddenly beside her, his face a grim mask. Sombra, his buckskin horse, was already saddled. Tahan emerged from the darkness, his eyes fixed on the distant flames. "It is more than wood," Tahan said, his voice low. He sniffed the air. "Kerosene. It is a professional fire." "It is a trap," Cole said, his hand on Sombra's neck. "They are waiting for us. They want us to ride into it." "Then we must," Ada said, her jaw set. "But not as fugitives, as a community. Rosalia, Mr. Whitaker, ring the fire bell. We are not saboteurs. We are the town's fire brigade. Get buckets, get wagons, get every man who can ride." She was no longer a teacher. She was a general. The people, desperate for leadership, obeyed. They rode out, a strange cavalcade of 20 men, buckboards and water wagons, with Ada, Cole, and Tahan in the lead. The fire was a roaring giant by the time they arrived. The immense wooden scaffolding for the concrete dam was fully engulfed, shooting sparks 100 feet into the air. And just as Cole had predicted, they were there. A dozen men, not Pike's deputies, but hard, quiet men in dark clothing. They stood in a perimeter, rifles at the ready, watching the fire. Their leader, a heavy-set man with a scarred face, stepped out, holding a lantern. "Well, look what we have here," he sneered. "The town fire brigade, come to put out the blaze. By all means, get closer." Tahan, who had scaled a small cliff to get a better view, froze. He saw what the leader's lantern illuminated. Not just the fire, but 3 small stacks of wooden crates, piled at the base of the burning structure. They were marked with the stark block letters of the mining company Dynamite. It was not just a fire to frame them. It was an execution. Bragg meant to kill the entire leadership of the town in one fiery blast, and claim they died in their own act of sabotage. Tahan gave a sharp, piercing bird cry, a signal of mortal danger. Cole heard it. He saw the crates at the same instant. "Ada, it is a trap! Get them back!" he roared. Ada turned to the townsfolk. Get back, it is going to blow." The leader laughed. "Too late. You little—" He did not finish. Cole Navarro, on Sombra, was no longer in front of them. He had turned his horse, driving his heels in, and ridden straight into the wide, newly full acequia. The water, swollen from the rain in the new spring, was 3 feet deep. Sombra plunged through it, spraying a great curtain of water, and emerged on the far flank of the armed men, behind their leader. The leader spun, shocked at the maneuver. He raised his rifle. He and Cole stood, 2 figures silhouetted against the massive wall of flame. "Navarro," the leader said, his voice a low growl of recognition. "So the rumors were true. You went soft, siding with sod busters and a schoolteacher." Cole's face was hard as granite. He slid from his horse. "Hello, Captain. It has been a long time since Cheyenne." It was the man who had been his superior, the man who had taught him to be a mercenary. "You should have stayed gone, boy," the captain spat. "Bragg pays a king's ransom for this. Pity I have to kill you." He lunged. It was not a gunfight. It was a brutal, close-quarters battle, the kind they both knew well. The captain was a bull, strong and relentless. Cole was a panther, faster, but he was wounded, his side a blaze of fresh agony. The captain's fist caught him in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Cole staggered. The captain grinned, pulling a long knife from his boot. "Always were too sentimental. Navarro." He lunged, the blade aimed at Cole's heart. Cole was on his back, the heat of the fire scorching his skin. He had no time for a gun. He had time for one thing, his mother's lariat. It snapped out from the ground, a blur of braided horsehair. It did not loop. It wrapped, fast and tight, around the captain's knife hand. Cole yanked, twisting his body. The knife flew free, hissing as it landed in the mud. Cole was on his feet in an instant. The dynamic of the fight reversed. He had the lariat, and he had the captain's arm twisted behind his back. He had his own knife at the man's throat. "Do it!" the captain growled, panting. "Show me you still have iron." Cole breathed, the smoke filling his lungs. He felt the fire at his back, the cool mud under his boots. He heard the shouts of the townspeople. He heard his mother's voice. "Use it to save." He shoved the man forward, face down in the mud. He did not kill. He did not even cut. He used the lariat, the symbol of his past, to secure his future. He tied the captain's hands, tight and expert. "You will face the judge." Cole panted. "The iron is still here. It just does new work." Across the ditch, the fire was reaching the dynamite. Ada saw it. The fuses were spitting. "The water!" she screamed, not at the fire, but at the acequia itself. "We cannot stop the blast, but we can save the fields." Cole's charge had given her the idea. The dam was a lost cause, but the water was not. "Break the bank," she commanded, pointing to the thirsty, dry fields that were the town's only hope for crops. "Use the fence posts. Get the water to the land." She plunged into the muddy ditch herself, shoving a heavy wooden post under the bank as a lever. The other men, seeing her, followed. They threw their weight against a dozen posts. With a great sucking groan, the bank of the acequia gave way. The clean, life-giving water, the gift of the rain and the spring, surged out. It was not a flood. It was a release. It poured over the dry, cracked earth, a dark, silver sheet in the firelight. "Let the dam burn!" Ada shouted, her voice triumphant, as she stood ankle-deep in the new, life-saving mud. "The water flows for all." At that moment, the dynamite exploded. A deafening, ground-shaking roar tore the night apart. The greedy dam, Bragg's monument to his own ambition, destroyed itself in a cloud of fire and splinters. But the townspeople were safe, shielded by the ditch. As the echoes of the blast faded and the great fire began to die, Tahan stood on the cliff overlooking the scene. The sky was turning a pale, clean gray with the first hint of dawn. He raised his arm. A shadow, a large hawk with a newly mended wing, took flight, soaring into the clean air. A low, steady rhythm began, floating over the smoking ruins and the wet fields. Thump, 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 thump. Tahan was beating a small skin drum. It was the sound of a heart, steady, calm, alive. When the sun rose, it revealed a scene of devastation and renewal. The dam was a smoking pile of charcoal, but the fields of San Dismas were dark and wet, thirsty no more. In the town square, Judge Thorne supervised the final act. Silas Bragg, his face gray and empty, was loaded into a federal prison wagon. Sheriff Pike, his head bowed, his authority and his arm broken, followed. The remaining mercenaries, including their captain, bound by a single horsehair lariat, were chained beside them. The cowardly councilman stood in the mud. Humiliated, Mr. Davies, the hardware man, stepped forward, hat in his hands. Miss Whitlock, Ada, he mumbled. We were wrong. We were afraid. We apologize. Before Ada could form a reply, Rosalia marched up, wiping soot from her hands onto her apron. Afraid, she snapped, her voice carrying. You were cowards. You sold your town for a handful of silver. You are lucky she is a good woman and not a banker, or every one of you would be ruined. Now stop apologizing and get a shovel. That ditch needs widening, and Ezra. She pointed to Whitaker. I expect our well to be flowing by noon. The tension was over. The long, dark night had broken. Later that afternoon, Ada found Cole by the livery. The sun was warm. He was sitting on a bench, his shirt off, while Rosalia carefully cleaned the long, shallow wound on his ribs. The bullet had torn the skin, but it was not deep. Rosalia saw Ada. She finished her work, gave Cole a firm pat on his good shoulder, and walked away, leaving them alone. Ada stood in front of him. The dust and soot were gone. Her dress was ruined, but she was clean. She looked at the raw, new wound on his side. Then her eyes moved up, to the small, neat scar on his forehead, the one her own shaking hands had stitched. She reached out, her fingers hesitant. She did not touch the new wound. She gently, lightly touched the pale, healed scar. He did not move. He just watched her face, his dark eyes quiet. You sew straight enough, I suppose, he said, his voice a low rumble. A small smile touched her lips. She leaned down. He did not move to meet her. He waited, letting her make the choice. She pressed her lips to his. It was not a kiss of fire or desperation. It was a kiss of arrival. It was short and gentle and real. It tasted of clean air and soap and the faint salt of his skin. She pulled back, her forehead resting against his for a moment, just as she had in the rain. We have a lot of work to do, she whispered. I know, he said. His hand came up, not to hold her, but to gently touch the back of her head, his fingers in her hair. It was a promise. It was the foundation for the rest of their lives. The work of healing began with the mud. San Dismas, washed clean of its dust and its tyrants, was now a valley of thick, red clay and boundless opportunity. The new spring in the town square was not enough. The great aquifer, the ghost spring, needed its own voice. The old acequia, the ditch her father had begun and that she had bled for, was the town's first priority. There was no talk of payment, no hiring. It was simply work that needed doing. The Community Water Council, with Ada at its head, put out the call. The town answered. They dug. The first day, it was only a dozen. Old man Whitaker, his back bent but his spirit straight, showed them where the old channel ran. The blacksmith, his heavy arm swinging a pickaxe, broke the hardpan. Rosalia, her skirts tied up, served hot coffee and bread. By the second day, there were 40. The women, seeing Rosalia, came with their own shovels. The former councilman, Davies, and the others showed up, their faces ashamed. They did not ask for orders. They just took shovels and fell in at the end of the line, their soft hands blistering in minutes. They did not complain. They worked until they bled, their first small payment on a large debt of honor. Cole Navarro was there from the first light. He was not a man for a shovel. He was a man of horses and systems. He organized the teams, his voice low and steady. He worked with the paroled mercenaries, the men he had fought. Judge Thorne, in a moment of true wisdom, had offered them a choice of federal penitentiary or 1 year of hard, constructive labor, rebuilding the town they had been paid to terrorize. Their former captain, the man Cole had bested by the fire, was the first to accept. Now, he heaved rocks, his face grim, his back aching. He and Cole did not speak of Cheyenne. There was no need. The work was the only language. Tahan came and went. He would stand on the bank of the growing ditch, watching the flow of the water, and then move a stake 10 feet to the left. He said the water liked to curve, not run straight. Whitaker argued with him, citing his levels and tools. Tahan just pointed to a line of willow trees a mile distant. The water wants to go there, he said. They followed Tahan's line. The water flowed faster. Ada worked alongside everyone. She was no longer just the keeper of the paper, the clerk. Her hands were raw, her face smudged with the same red clay that covered everyone else. She was the keeper of the water now, and the water was in the earth. And the children, who a week ago had been listless with thirst, were everywhere. They were forbidden from the dig site, but they played in the clean, bubbling overflow from the town spring. Their laughter a sound the town had not heard in months. They splashed and shouted, their small bodies covered in mud. It was the sound of a memory being healed. They would not grow up remembering the drought. They would grow up remembering the day the water, and the laughter, came back. After a week of labor, the main ditch was clear. It ran, clean and bright, from the aquifer, past the town, and toward the parched fields. The new Community Water Council declared a day of rest and dedication. It was not a church service. It was something new. They gathered at the head of the acequia. Judge Thorne, his bags packed to return to Santa Fe, was there as the official witness. Tahan stood on one side of the head gate. Rosalia stood on the other. Ada stepped forward, not with a Bible, but with a new ledger. It was the first official record of the Water Council. She read the new charter, her voice clear in the quiet morning air. The rules were simple. The water was a right, not a property. Each family was allotted a share of time. No man could sell his share. No man could hoard. Any surplus went to a community reserve. The council's books would be open, posted in the square, every month. When she finished, there was a quiet, respectful silence. Rosalia stepped forward. She said that such a fine ditch needed a name. In her language, the Spanish that had been in this valley for 100 years. They would call it Acequia de la Esperanza, the Ditch of Hope. Tahan then stepped forward. He said that in his language. The water was not new, but it was newly freed. He would call it the stream that remembers. Cole Navarro, with the blacksmith's tools, carved both names into a heavy plank of wood and set it at the head gate. The two cultures, side by side, guarding the same water. Before Judge Thorne left, he had two final pieces of business. The first was the formal sentencing of the hired mercenaries. He looked at the men, lined up, their faces clean, their hands blistered from the work. He said the law demanded prison. But justice, he said, demanded common sense. They had been tools of a greater crime. And he had seen them work this past week. He had seen them sweat to build what they had been paid to burn. He hereby commuted their sentences to 1 year of public service, under the supervision of the new council. Their captain looked at Cole. He did not smile, but he nodded. It was a start. The second piece of business was Cole himself. The The $500 reward for his capture, the one Pike had posted, was still on the books. Judge Thorne, with a small smile, had dismissed the false charges and made the reward payable to Cole himself. He handed Cole the pouch of federal gold. Cole took it. He looked at the heavy coins. Then he looked at the pouch he already held in his other hand. He said he had come to San Dismas with nothing but his horse and his rope. He had earned money in Cheyenne, money he was not proud of. He poured his own pouch of coins into the federal pouch. He held it up. "This is old money," he said to the judge. "It is drifter's pay. It is ghost money." He asked that the judge not give it to him, but use it to start a new town fund, a fund to buy water from other valleys, in times of drought, for any family who could not pay. He said he had a name for it, the Horsehair Lariat Fund. Ada watched him, her heart so full it ached. This was the man she had seen in the shadows. He was a drifter no more. He had set down the heaviest burden of all his past. He had found his roots in the wet, red clay of her town. Life began to settle into a new, healthier rhythm. The schoolhouse bell rang again, but it rang at night. Rosalia, seeing the paroled mercenaries idling in the evenings, had decided they were a waste of good lantern oil. She started a night school in the saloon. She taught them sums and how to sign their own names. Ada, her own schoolhouse full by day, joined her. She taught the miners' children, the ones who had never had a day of schooling, how to read a primer. And Tahan, now a formal member of the council, began his own classes. He did not use the schoolhouse. He took the children, both Anglo and Mexican, out onto the plain. He taught them what he had taught Ada. He taught them to read the earth, how to see a storm in the movement of ants, how to find north by the bark of a tree, how to know the sound of water under their feet. The town was healing, not just its laws, but its knowledge. Ada and Cole were not in town, her old family land. The plot with the aquifer was where they had decided to be. They began to build. It was not a grand house. It was a small, strong cabin. Made of adobe bricks, they mixed themselves from the land's own clay and straw. They worked together in the long, quiet afternoons. Cole, his wounds healing clean, set the heavy roof beams, his muscles moving with a smooth, practiced power. Ada, her arms covered in mud, formed the bricks and set them. It was a comfortable, silent labor. They spoke, but they did not need to. They moved around each other, a team, a partnership. Cole built one large window, facing east. He set the frame himself, measuring it with a care that went beyond carpentry. When Ada stood at it, she saw a perfect, unobstructed view of the high, flat mesa, the place where she had first heard the earth's heartbeat, the place where the rain had been born. The new Water Council held its first formal meeting at a table in Rosalia's saloon. They were a strange, perfect committee, Ada. The teacher, Rosalia, the heart of the town, Whitaker, the old, practical hands, the blacksmith, the new voice of the merchants, and Tahan, the quiet, ancient wisdom. They signed the new charter, the one Ada had read at the ceremony, below the legal words. Ada added one last line: "No one will thirst on this land again." They all signed their names under it, a binding, community pledge. That evening, Ada and Cole sat on the porch of their unfinished house. The air was cool and smelled of curing adobe and the damp earth. The acequia gurgled nearby, a sound of constant, gentle life. The braided horsehair lariat was not on Cole's belt. It hung from a wooden peg just inside the door, coiled in a perfect, neat circle. It was no longer a tool of survival. It was a talisman of their new life, a covenant. As the sun set, its last light caught something on the nearest fence post, the one closest to the ditch. It was a single, red-tailed hawk feather, tied with a strip of sinew. Tahan had passed by. It was his blessing. It was a promise that the land was at peace. The day of the water festival was the day San Dismas was truly born. It did not begin with a proclamation or a gunshot, but with two sounds: rising together in the clean morning air. From the small church, the old bell rang, not with the frantic clang of a gallows, but with a slow, joyful peal. And from the edge of the mesa, faint but clear, came the steady, deep heartbeat of Tahan's skin drum. One sound from the new world, one from the old. Both spoke the same language of gratitude. The entire town gathered in the square. Long tables had been built from fresh pine, and they groaned under the weight of the food. It was a feast of simple things. There was cornbread, yellow and steaming. There were pots of beans and roasted wild turkeys brought in by the paroled mercenaries, who were proving to be expert hunters. There were gallons of hot, black coffee, strong enough to float a horseshoe, served by Rosalia herself. It was a celebration of labor. Everyone was still streaked with the red mud of the acequia. They were tired, their muscles aching, their hands raw. But as they ate, they laughed. It was a new sound for the town, a deep, shared laughter that had been absent for a long, dry year. They were a community, forged not in gold, but in water and sweat. The celebration was loud, but the promise was quiet. Later that afternoon, when the sun was low and casting long, peaceful shadows, Ada Whitlock and Cole Navarro walked away from the crowd. They did not go far, just to the bank of the new ditch, where the water, their water, slipped past with a gentle, chuckling sound. They had no minister, no church. They stood by the Acequia de la Esperanza. They did not have fine clothes. They wore the clean, patched work clothes of the new town. Cole held out his hand. He did not have a gold ring. He had taken a small, worn horseshoe nail, and in the blacksmith's forge had patiently heated it, bent it, and hammered it into a simple, dark iron circle. He had polished it until it shone with a dull, strong light. He slipped it onto Ada's finger. Ada, in turn, held out her hand. She had a simple band of silver, one her mother had worn. It was the only thing of value she had, besides the land. She slid it onto his hand. It was a perfect fit. Tahan, who had followed them, stepped forward. He held a long, thin strip of cloth, dyed a deep, vibrant red. He did not speak. He simply took Ada's hand, and then Cole's, and with a series of deft, intricate knots, he tied their wrists together with the red band. He then touched the water of the ditch, and touched the cloth. The water was the witness. The bond was sealed. They stood there for a long moment, bound, the water flowing at their feet. When they turned to walk back, they found they had been watched. The small group of gentlemen, the former councilmen, the merchants who had once lined up to dance with her, were standing a respectful distance away. They were not smirking, they were not whispering. Mr. Davies, the hardware man, stepped forward, his hat clutched in both of his blistered hands. He looked shy and deeply humbled. He looked at Cole, then at Ada. "Mr. Navarro, ma'am, Mrs. Navarro," he corrected himself, a small, nervous smile touching his face. "That was a fine thing." He cleared his throat. "I do not expect forgiveness," he said, his voice low. "But I would like to ask if you would count me as a friend. I am a good man with a shovel. I am finding—" Ada looked at the man who had called Tahan a savage. She saw the shame in his eyes, and the new, hard-earned honor. She smiled, a real, warm smile. "We can always use another friend, Mr. Davies, and the ditch needs to be widened tomorrow." "I will be there," he said, nodding, his relief profound. The old society, built on power and fear, had cracked. A new one, built on shared work and respect, was being born. Later, as the festival fires burned low and the townspeople began to drift home, Ada and Cole sat on a bale of hay, watching the last of the embers. "Freedom," Ada said, her voice soft, as if testing the word. "I used to think it was about property, about my father's deed, about the law." Cole watched the fire, his arm resting on his knee. "I was wrong," she continued, Tahan knew. You knew. She looked at him. Freedom is not just doing what you want or owning what you want. It is knowing what not to sell. We did not sell the water, and we did not sell each other. He looked at her, the firelight in his dark eyes. He nodded. That was the whole truth of it. The future arrived the next week. It did not come with a bang, but with a wagon full of scientific instruments. Ada, using the new council's authority, had ordered them. They built a proper measuring station at the head gate, a small, neat structure where they could gauge the water's flow, its depth, its very heartbeat. The first class was held by the ditch. Ada, with her books, taught the children the principles of hydrology, of flow and pressure. Tahan, standing beside her, taught them how to read the clouds and how to feel the coming rain in their own bones. Cole, with the paroled mercenaries, taught them how to engineer a new channel, how to use a lever and a fulcrum to move a rock that weighed more than a man. The children learned engineering and respect in the same lesson. They learned to build with the land, not upon it. Cole's future arrived on a horse. A man in a fine suit, with a silver watch chain, rode in from the east. He represented a powerful cattle syndicate in Texas that had heard of the incident at milepost 341. "Mr. Navarro," the man said, offering a cigar. Cole declined. "I am authorized to offer you a position, captain of our range detectives. It pays $500 a month. In gold. We need men who can handle complications. Men like you. Men who know how to use a rope and a gun." It was the old life, served on a silver platter. It was Cheyenne, all over again. The money, the power, the hollow respect. Cole looked at the man. Then he looked across the square, at the small adobe cabin he and Ada were finishing. "I appreciate the offer, sir," Cole said, his voice polite and flat. "But I am not a captain, and I am not for hire." The man left, baffled. That evening, at the Water Council meeting, Ada made the last proposal of the day. The acequia was the town's lifeblood. It needed a protector, not a sheriff, not a deputy. It needed a marshal, a water marshal, a man who understood the land, the law, and the people, a man who could ride the line, who could handle complications with wisdom, not just a gun. The vote was unanimous. The job did not pay $500 a month. It paid $40, and a house. That night, they sat on the porch of their finished home, the first home Cole Navarro had ever had. A light rain, a mist fine as spun silver, was falling, but the air was not cold. The acequia gurgled in the darkness. Ada leaned her head on his shoulder. He did not stiffen. He did not pull away. He simply settled, his warmth a solid, comforting presence beside her. She could feel the slow, steady beat of his heart under his shirt. It was a rhythm of peace. He tilted his head, his lips brushing her hair. She looked up. He kissed her. It was as gentle as the mist, a kiss of quiet, profound belonging. It held no questions and needed no answers. Tahan visited them as the sun set the next day. He did not come to the house, but stood by the ditch, watching the water. He pointed to the red, wet earth, and then to the small cabin. "When the people and the land speak the same tongue," he said, his voice blending with the sound of the water will stay." He turned and walked away, a silent figure disappearing into the twilight, his work done. The last image of San Dismas was not of the town, but of the land. High above, the red-tailed hawk Tahan had released turned a slow, effortless circle in the clean blue sky. Its shadow, a dark, fleeting cross, passed over the bright, silver line of the acequia. On the porch of the small cabin, the braided horsehair lariat hung from its peg. A slight evening breeze, carrying the smell of wet sage, moved through the porch. The lariat, the symbol of a long and hard journey, stirred, ringing softly against the adobe wall. In the mail that week, a letter had arrived from Santa Fe. It was not a threat, but a notice. A new railroad. The Southern Pacific was beginning to survey the border territory. 100 miles to the south, new men, new money, and new thirst were coming to the desert. Ada looked at Cole. He looked at her, a new challenge. But this time, they were not alone. This time, they had a community. This time, they had each other. Thank you for listening to this story. Please comment with where you are listening from so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And do not forget to subscribe to my channel Wild West Tales, like the video, and give it a super thanks to help this story be heard by more people.